No problem.
Okay. So Melissa, make sure that you shut off YouTube in your browser. You can't have that on either.
No problem.
And then you can hit that message in the Zoom meeting thing. Okay, do you see the message that says this meeting is being live streamed?
Yes, hang on 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, I got it. Yep,
You can just say got it.
got it.
I'm still seeing it.
Are you still seeing it? Barb, did you connect back on? Okay, we are up and running, Chris. We can.
Okay. Can I get started?
Yep.
Thank you. All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the January 18th meeting of the Operations Work Group. I'm calling this meeting to order. We do not have any public appearances tonight, nor did we receive any written comments, and we do not have any minutes to approve. So we're going to dive right
Chris,
into...
we do have a public appearance.
Oh, we have a public appearance. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry. Yeah,
We have
I missed
one.
that one. All right, we have one public appearance, so let's do those.
Okay, his name is Nathan. Hi, Nathan, and have you joined us?
Yes, I have.
All right. We are ready. I'll start the 3 minutes now.
All right, I appreciate it. All right, so my name is Nathan Haytag. I am a tech ed teacher at La Follette High School. I'm representing a group of teachers who have been denied religious exemptions from the MMSD COVID vaccine mandates. We believe this decision is in violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which protects individuals' religious beliefs in the workplace. Myself and other MMSD employees have sent multiple emails to Dr. Jenkins, the school board, and HR, and have received little to no explanation as to why we have been denied religious exemptions, while other MMSD employees have been approved religious exemptions. Myself and many other employees have been informed our employment with MMSD will be terminated this Friday, January 21st, at the end of our shift. I have 3 questions. What criteria is MMSD using for accepting or denying religious exemptions? Who is making the decision to deny or accept religious exemptions? And why have myself and many other MMSD staff been continually ignored by the district in our request for this information?
All right, Chris, just the one public speaker this evening.
Sorry, I'm muted. We are not noticed to discuss vaccination tonight, but I would encourage the administration to get back to Mr. Hodge with answers. So thank you. We have no other public appearances, so we will now move into our agenda. Again, welcome. I'm glad everybody's here. We have an exciting agenda tonight because we are launching our 2022-23 school year budget process. Additionally, we will be getting updated on ESSER funds, both ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. We'll be learning about a proposal from the administration to fund ACT prep courses for MMSD students, and we'll be getting an update on the wellness policy process. Before we dive into all this good stuff, Dr. Jenkins, I'm wondering if you would like to set the stage with a few comments.
Thank you, first of all, Ms. Caruzzi, for going over the items that we're going to be sharing tonight. I think the team is really eager to get started with a number of the items. I will weigh in some. It's very important that we are all working together and making sure that our community understands in terms of where we are right now and where we're looking to go with our budget. I think we put together a few things here tonight that will also forecast some of the things that we're looking to do in the future. So we're ready to get started here with our team.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, good. Let's go into our first agenda item, which is 2022-23 budget development, including an ESSER update. To set the stage, this is our first step in a months-long process that will culminate in June with a vote on the draft preliminary budget. Our focus tonight is to give Ross feedback on the guiding principles, goals, and strategy for this budget, to understand our revenue forecast, to learn about the timeline and process for budgeting ESSER 3 funds, including plans for community input, any updates we might get on ESSER 2 as well. I do want to note that we are not discussing base wage increases or collective bargaining tonight. We are planning to work on this early in the budget cycle, and we will go into closed session this coming Monday, I believe, for this conversation. I'm going to hand things over to Ross. And Ross, I just wanted to check in about pause points in this discussion. Would it be possible to pause for feedback after the slide on guiding principles, and then again at the end of the presentation? Will that work for you?
That would be fine.
Okay, so 2 pause points. Otherwise, please hold your questions until we get to those points in the presentation. And Ross, thank you so much.
All right. Let me get my screen set up here. Okay, so this evening we do have a number of things I want to cover. Many of this may sound familiar, but the important thing to note is that tonight's meeting is going to ground us in not only where our budget process is currently, but where we're headed, and a little bit of a kind of a reality of where all of the discussions around the state budget and our current budget have been leading us over the past couple of months. So first, to ground us here, we have our goals and our vision statements indicating every child is on track to graduate, ready for college, career, and community. The district and every school the district and every school in it is a place where children and staff and families thrive, and African-American children and youth excel in school. Our budget planning approach, we are in the preliminary stages, beginning stages of the 22-23 budget development process. Tonight, we're going to go a little bit over our budget goals and some of our guiding factors for the revenue streams we're looking at for the coming year, identifying where our enrollment is headed and what that means for some decisions forthcoming for our baseline staffing plan. And for future outlook, we know that the coming months, we have to develop a solid compensation strategy, identify and fund any district strategic priority actions, and discuss and finalize any healthcare and negotiations for benefits we need to accomplish in February and March. So our objectives for tonight is a high-level overview of the 22-23 budget. Again, we're going to look over the outlook and enrollment trends as we know them today, review the known factors on our revenue projections for 22-23, and how that will lead our expenditure strategies for the coming months. And at the end, we're going to go back and look at the goals and parameters that we're going to set forth for the coming budget development year. I want to provide the board an update on our ESSER 3 communication plan with the public and community. And all of the decisions and discussions we begin today are going to guide our discussion for the next 6 months, again, leading to what Chris mentioned before about the June budget vote for the preliminary budget. Again, this is another look at our high-level timeline. We are in January, so this is the budget kickoff, overview, revenue, and projection strategy. And here are the guiding principles that we're engaging for the coming year. All of our resources will be allocated in line with our district core values, aimed at the greatest impact on our strategic framework, with a primary focus on early literacy and beyond. We're going to maintain a multi-year long-range perspective on both revenue sources and investments, accelerated outcomes for academics, COVID mitigation strategies, and continuing reopening efforts to keep our buildings staffed and opened. Maximize operational efficiencies and use of our revenue authority to ensure stability in our schools, given the amount of uncertainty we've all been working through under COVID and in the last couple of years. And build on practices that are showing data supported promise for the future. And Chris, would you like me to pause here?
Yeah, that would be great. Before we move on, I just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page with these guiding principles. If you have any questions or if you have any suggested changes, this would be a good time to bring them up. Like, we don't want to revisit these in 2 months and question them. We want to I'll get on the same page now. So, and I can't see everybody, so please use the hand raising feature if you want to comment on these or have any questions. Nikki.
Yes, I think the staff compensation and the healthcare probably should also be part of our guiding principles because of the fact we can't adequately staff our buildings without having quality staff. So I don't know how we would work that in there, but I think we need to put it directly in the guiding principle. But that's just me.
Nikki, that's a really good suggestion. And those things are in our goals for the budget. So let's put that on hold and see how they work in the goals. And if you feel like they also need to be reflected in the guiding principles, let's go back to that, because I agree with you that that's important. So I had one comment, and that was the first bullet point with the focus on early literacy and beyond. Early literacy and beyond is also in the goals, and it feels a little bit too narrow for a guiding principle. I was wondering if we could just end this one with the strategic framework goals and hone in more on specific priorities in the budget goals themselves. Would others, feel free to argue with me if you feel that that's not a good idea. But I think we have a lot of priorities, and calling out early literacy and beyond as a principle feels a little bit narrow to me. As a goal, it makes sense.
Okay, I'll make a note of that, Chris, for this slide in the future.
Yep, and I definitely agree with that, Chris. We could put it there in the goals. That was a great catch there. Same way with the other thing we want to do, put it in the goals.
And I think it is in the goals. So we'll double check when we get there, but because, yep. The other thing, and this may be covered by maintain a multi-year long-range perspective, but I'm wondering if another way to frame that, particularly given all of our non-recurring revenue that we have at this point in time, our one-time funds, is that we need to consider future budgets when budgeting one-time funds. I wonder if we need to call that out directly as a piece of maintaining a multi-year long-range perspective, that those, particularly the non-recurring exemptions for enrollment are volatile, and we need to be really careful not to work ourselves into a structural deficit by depending too heavily on those funds. And we might also want to think about cushioning the blow when our enrollment stabilizes and those funds dry up. So, Nikki, I see your hand up again, or is it still up from before? No, okay. All right. I am not seeing any other hands. So Ross, I think you can keep going. Oh, Savian has his hand up. Never mind. I'm sorry. Savian.
Sorry, no worries. Thank you. Yeah, I would agree that early literacy and beyond is too narrow. I'm wondering what about adding language like trying to maintain investments in the strategic equity priorities. I think that's the language we use, or investments.
So maybe with a primary focus on our equity investments?
Yeah.
Something like that work?
Yeah. But otherwise, I think we could also get by with just strategic framework goals.
Great, thank you.
That's good feedback, and I'm very comfortable with that change. So, all right, any other feedback on these guiding principles? Okay, Ross, let's move on.
All right. So I do want to provide another update and do another situation analysis on our revenue streams and our identified resources for the coming year. So under our revenue limit, we know that this is an authority controlled by the state biennial budget. And this current biennial budget, we have 2 years of a $0 increase in the revenue limit per member and this includes the next year, 22-23. For reference, and I have a graph to show this later as well, the revenue limit increase per pupil has been below $200 per member since the 10-11 school year, which of course was the predecessor to Act 10. Additionally, we have a relatively new form of funding in the state formula for per pupil categorical aid. This is authorized as a dollar per member figure, calculated on the 3-year rolling average, like the revenue limit. This is also seeing a $0 increase in the coming budget year. Per pupil categorical aid has been volatile since its creation in Act 10, but it is important to note that this is not a funding stream protected under state funding formulas. That is to say that if the state budget were to make a drastic change in this funding, we would not be able to react by backfilling or identifying another source. This value is currently frozen at $742 per member and has been frozen at that level for the past 2 to 3 years. Finally, we know that the only new source of revenue we have is from our operating revenue in the 2020 referendum. The coming year, 22-23, we have $9 million scheduled to go into our base revenue limit for available to use. However, it is important to note that some of the non-recurring exemptions that Chris mentioned earlier, namely hold harmless, is reducing our revenue limit authority in this regard and will impact our total revenue limit, as I show later on in these slides. Once again, this is a graphical representation of the change in annual revenue limit and per pupil categorical aid. The dip in the graph in 11-12 is the adjustment year for Act 10. Since then, we've seen a very volatile funding outlook for K-12 education. And for the current year and the following year, you can see the graph bottoms out at 0 as an adjustment for this current school year. Another review is, here is a look of our 3-year membership average over the last 7 years. Our 3-year rolling average is beginning to catch up with some of the drastic changes we saw during the COVID-19 impact in the 2021 school year. Again, we hope the enrollment to stabilize in coming years at either the current level or hopefully some sort of an increase in the coming years. But it's important to note that because of the 1-year change, it's going to take 3 to 4 years for that adjustment downward to normalize within the formula, which is why the graphs are showing such a sharp decline. Because each year we add a new year at a lower level, the graph catches up with that 1-year impact. I also have it highlighted on here, as we've done in the past, that our resident K-12 membership is in blue on this graph, and the increase in our 2X charter membership, those are students that are not currently attending our schools, but that we pass revenue limit authority through to those entities, is representing a larger portion of this graph each year. So on this slide, I wanted to attempt to reconstruct the revenue limit for you, at least in a high-level fashion. At the very top, I have 2 columns. There's a column for the current year, 21-22, and the upcoming year, 22-23. The data on the left side is what we used in approving our fall budget in this past October. The information on the right are current estimates based on known factors in the state budget and enrollment projections forecasted for the coming year. You'll notice that the 3-year rolling average is dropping approximately 440 students. This is not a 1-year change in our anticipated enrollment projection. In fact, if you go back to our projection from November that was submitted to the board, we were only anticipating roughly a decrease of another 150 students going to the 22-23 school year. The change in the 3-year average reflects the catch up of the impacts I mentioned before, that we had significant adjustments in the 2021 and 21-22 school years. So next, we'll take these line by line. The base revenue limit is the initial calculation of what was authorized in the previous year and what revenue authority carries forward. So those green boxes where it says base revenue limit represent the literal base revenue limit before changes in the current year. The next two boxes is where I want you all to notice what is happening with hold harmless. The hold harmless exemption is triggered whenever the 3-year rolling average multiplied by the per pupil revenue limit amount generates a lower number than the prior year. So those numbers in red are what's being given to the school district as a one-time exemption to bring you back up to the prior year base threshold. Which brings you to the fourth line, talking about current revenue limit. This is the current revenue limit we have to work with before any other exemptions are considered. This includes recurring exemptions related to the referendum we passed in 2020 and any other non-recurring exemptions such as declining enrollment, energy efficiency, etc. As you work down each column, you'll see that the actual total revenue limit totals up under the bottom in those final green boxes to show that from one year to the next, in other words, this year to next year, our revenue limit is only going to grow approximately $3.4 million. This is a significantly low increase in our revenue limit considering everything we approved in the 2020 referendum. However, there's something else to highlight here as well. I included another set of boxes in yellow at the bottom that show that last year we also under-levied our final authority based on the idea that we were receiving these non-recurring exemptions, increasing our budget beyond what we had identified already in our fall approval. Because we still have significant declining enrollment and hold harmless is being triggered again for 22-23, many of those one-time exemptions repeated or are scheduled to repeat for the upcoming year. I do not call this carryover because it is not carryover, but I highlight it because it does show a different gap between the used revenue limit authority in the 21-22 school year and the anticipated total revenue limit for 22-23. This identifies that there's approximately just under $6 million of room in our revenue limit on a one-year basis to identify for operational expenses in the coming year. So for our strategy for next year, we have approximately $6 million to work with when we're discussing what types of priorities and compensation changes we may be looking at for the upcoming several months. I have on the left side, a quick identification of what resources we just mentioned, the $6 million, and some items below that are the usual suspects, so to speak, that we have to discuss each year when planning the budget. On the left side, we see that under the salary and wage plan, we have a range of salary authority between what's identified as just steps and what is estimated at this point to be the approximate max base wage for the coming year. You can see that range shows about $5.8 million to just over $18 million. I will identify that while current compensation goals are not set for this group tonight, we do know that early indications of our CPI index for the coming year is easily going to be the highest it's been in over 20 years. On top of that, we know we have agreements with our healthcare providers that show that we have a cap of approximately 3% for our health plans for the coming year. That employee benefits plan represents that 3% in our current calculations. Below that, we have a box identified for excellence and equity, equity and excellence actions, or priority actions, as we've called them in the past, to be determined, indicating that many of these items are currently under review or being identified by the administration for additional discussion. And finally, we have a box that we hold each year for required allowances for items that increase whether we want them to or not, such as net change in open enrollment, contractual increases due to other forms of inflation, or things that we need to plan for that are not necessarily priority actions. All those items considered, even at the base level, where we're talking about just step increase, show an initial revenue gap of approximately $2.6 million. This means that we have a lot of work to do to identify how we identify new actions, move the district forward, and accomplish our goals surrounding base wage and compensation for staff. So now the next step for our next step of our work is how we're going to identify these gap closing strategies to identify the initial gap and other things that will drive the gap higher as we entertain other options. There's been some discussion. If you remember in the fall, I did identify that we're going to be bringing a budget or a debt defeasance plan to the board in March. We're currently working with our financial advisors at PMA to structure this for you. We have a limited amount of debt under our Fund 38 debt schedule. A reminder, Fund 38 is within the revenue limit. So any future debt payments we free up in that category will allow us to free up other money within the revenue limit to help us close the gap we're currently talking about. Additionally, we know that in order to move other items forward, we need to do some significant budget realignment. This includes looking at district-wide accounts for things like interest, rates, utilities, other contracts that we may want to cancel or not continue. Identification of staffing and workbook alignment due to declining enrollment trends, review of central office department budgets and staffing, and our stop doing list, which are priorities that we need to identify that either it's time to repurpose them or that we just need to stop doing because they're not moving the district forward. Long story short, because that was long, is that in order to move the district forward, we will need to repurpose to fund our highest priorities and balance the next year's budget. Quick review of our non-recurring exemptions discussion, which we've had, I think, at every operations work group in this year so far, is under the revenue limit, non-recurring exemptions exist on a one-year basis, but not every non-recurring exemption is the same. However, since 1415, the total of the non-recurring exemptions generated from Madison Metropolitan School District has exploded from about 378K to a projected $15 million in 22-23. Some of these exemptions are tied to specific expenditures, which are a good thing, in that things like private vouchers and energy efficiency, any increase in those exemptions are directly tied to dollar expenses, meaning if one or the other were to leave in 1 year, so would the exemption. So at least they would be tied together in their impact to the budget. However, declining enrollment and hold harmless, which I've spoken at length about, are based on changes in the 3-year rolling average and our base revenue limit calculation. These exemptions are very volatile. They're sensitive to enrollment changes. And as our enrollment begins to stabilize, and it will eventually, a lot of these exemptions will start to disappear under our authority. So while it's certainly not a bad thing to utilize these exemptions in our budgetary planning, it is important to note that the trajectory of the revenue limit authority for us right now is on a downward slope. And when our enrollment starts to stabilize, our spending needs to be in line with how those enrollment numbers change. Once again, the projections for 22-23 enrollment anticipate a modest reduction in the September student count per the enrollment projection we submitted to the board in November. A brief update on a future COVID funding impact. We know that ESSER 3 is on the horizon. $42.4 million is our estimated award for the coming year. We must initiate that all of the work we do in ESSER 3 has a it addresses student social, emotional, and academic needs and addresses the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented student subgroups. I've also listed here the same 5 areas we discussed at previous board meetings on what ESSER 3 is to be used on. That includes preparedness and response, for example, PPE and sanitation, outreach and services for special populations, early language learners, individualized education plans and learning loss, educational technology, devices, software, cybersecurity, addressing long-term school closures, additional LTE support, food service, software needs, and last but not least, mental health and service and supports. I'm happy to report that we are beginning the public input session for our ESSER 3 plans. The ESSER 3 website was launched earlier today. It includes some resources on what ESSER 3 is, what are the federal requirements to use on ESSER 3, and additionally, a link to a survey on our Let's Talk platform that gives our community members, staff, and families the ability to give us feedback on what types of priorities we need to entertain at ESSER 3. It's important to note that this actually is a requirement of the grant that we have these public input sessions. This is not the only public input session we are planning right now. We do have goals to put other in place. I know that right now building support is of our utmost importance right now. So a lot of the planning around such in-person and or other live events where we would get other feedback are a bit delayed at this point, I'll admit. Finally, I do want to identify that a review of our current budget goals for 22-23, and Chris will do another look through of the bullets on here in case we need to make some edits. The goal of our budgets, our budget goals for the coming year is that we will distribute equitable use of resources to support students with the highest needs, reduce the number of sections below minimum of the board's class size policy, allowing for more targeted resource allocation, utilize the board's educational equity tool for decision-making outside of already approved board policies, invest in a focused set of priorities aimed at multi-year investments to meet persistent equity needs with a primary focus on early literacy, and provide total compensation, steps, and base wage to employees to the greatest extent possible given the state budget challenges. So Chris, I'll pause there if we want to have any other input.
Thank you, Ross. I appreciate it. And yeah, let's start out with this goal slide. And maybe I think it's really important that everybody have a chance to ask questions and make suggestions on these goals, because this will frame how we move forward with how Ross in particular moves forward with shaping this budget and decide, trying to get a sense of where our priorities lie. So I'm just going to call on everybody to make sure everybody gets a voice. And Nikki, I do see your hand, but I was actually, well, maybe I'll start out with you. Gordon, I am going to call on you too. So just so you know, because we need your voice at the table for this. So Nikki, please go ahead with comments on the goals specifically.
Absolutely. One, I'm really excited that we put the class size policy in the goals. I've got a lot of emails about 27 people in a class at Shorewood and other places, and I can see how that would be worrisome, especially with COVID. So I think this is a very good goal. I like that we aren't cutting our equity strategy, but we're still going to do the base wage as much as humanly possible, which I think is absolutely necessary. Honestly, the equitable use of resources, besides the equity tool, one thing I worry about is on disability and individuals of people, Black and Brown individuals, as well as Native American individuals. Equitable use of resources doesn't always get to the root of the problem. They may see that there are some inequity, but there may be far more than we can imagine. Is there any other way we can find the inequities to be able to fix them? I'm not a budget expert. I'm just curious. And that's it.
Thanks, Nikki. Russ, did you want to respond to that at all, or?
Sorry, my button kept hiding itself. I understand what you're saying, Nikki. I don't think that the goal contradicts what you're saying in that we still strive for equitable use of resources, but can we do more to identify disparities among certain groups? Certainly. But I still think the goal speaks to what we are trying to do, and that the identification and addressing certain goals. For example, like last fall, we made a conscious decision to do a land acknowledgement plan with many of our surrounding nations. So there's always things like that that will come up during the development process for the board to discuss and entertain. So I still think that's in the same vein.
Thanks, Nikki. All right, next on my list is Ollie. Ollie, do you have any feedback on these goals?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, Board Member Carusi. I think that the goals are really appreciated, and it's nice to see us kind of focus the framework of our budget. In March, we will have been, combating COVID-19 for 2 years. And I think we are kind of beyond the part of this pandemic where we get to be shocked and recalibrate really fast. And so having an ongoing plan for the reality of the pandemic and the budgetary implications of the pandemic and how that informs this process, I think has to be part of our goals. I think, really, acknowledging that the pandemic will shape a large part of how we function as a district moving forward, is something that we need to I guess adjust to and have sound goals around. And that's my first comment. My second comment is, is that I think an investment in the arts, an investment in staffing, and an investment in retention at this point are sincere goals. And I think when we speak to base wage and total compensation, and as well as benefits, that's one way to speak to that goal. However, I think that there is a more expansive way to have that conversation. And then the other comment I had was really specific to class size. And I know we've talked about this before as both an instructional strategy and, a strategy that has real benefits in terms of our budget, which is mixed age classrooms. And so seeing the reduction of sections below the minimum of the board's class size policies, thus allowing for more targeted resources or resource allocation. I think that speaks to efficiency, but I think really, outlining what are the sound strategies and practices that allow for us to do that is super important. I also think we use the term equity a lot in our district. And I think sometimes equity gets conflated with the idea that we can hurt everybody equally, and that is somehow like the equitable way of doing things. And so I think using the equity tool to create, to meet the very specific needs of each individual child in each of our schools is a really a nice utilization of the board's equity tool. And I'm excited to work together in that work. Thank you for your presentation, Ross.
Thank you. Ananda, you are next on my list.
Yeah, thank you so much, Board Member Carusi, and thank you so much, Ross, for the way in which you're presenting to us the budget. I really appreciated having the set of priorities and the goals. I would like to see some alignment and how the goals are being reflected in our priorities. I think Board Member Vandermuller already highlighted around compensation. I think the only thing I would add from what the two other board members spoke before was how are we addressing actually attracting more students. So I think there's a conversation around retention of our current students. That is a strategy that both address our ability to respond to class size, our ability to make sure that the compensation does not shift over different years, but also making sure that that we have a comprehensive enrollment strategy. And I feel like we haven't been necessarily proactive or strategic on how we highlight some of our schools and some of our programming in order to continue to attract both MMSD students, but also students from other districts as well, from nearby districts as well. So those are my only comments in addition to agreeing with my colleagues that spoke before. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, who's next on my list? Gordon, do you have any comments or feedback on our goals?
Yes, thank you, Board Member Carusi. I would say I really like when it says to invest in a focused set of priorities aimed at the multi-year investments to meet persistent equity needs with primary focus on early literacy, because we know how vital early literacy is for our students. And we have decided in this current administration that we will focus heavily on that. So I'm happy to see that here as one of the main goals in this budget, in this budget proposal. What I have some kind of concerns about is when it says provide total compensation. Now we all know there's there's labor shortages all throughout the nation. And I know we are trying hard to, to attract talent here to our district. So I would just wonder if we are upping, compensation to, be to be a vital player in a in a competitive market for us here, because we just want to make sure that we get the people here, and that we also be able to retain them. And I also was wondering, this part is something that needs to do on my own. The board's educational equity tool. It's my first time hearing about it, but again, that's probably something I just have to do my own research about. But this also looked great to me. Mr. McPherson, you did a wonderful job with your presentation. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Chris Gomez-Schmidt.
Thank you, Board Member Carusi. I'm glad that we get a chance to discuss these and take a serious look at our budget goals for what might be a challenging budget ahead. I guess there's one thing that Nikki was asking about with the equitable use of resources, that first goal, and I just wanted to clarify, when we're saying that, is that mainly in the allocation of resources to the schools through the budget books? Is that what that is talking about?
I would not say it's tied to that alone. I say it's in everything that we do. So it ties back to staffing allocations, including concepts we do for low class sizes and AGR classrooms, Title I allocations, building formula allocations, everything.
Okay, and district level resources too, right?
Yes,
not just
of course.
okay, yep. And then I guess I would agree with the idea of the class size policy not just being about reducing the number of sections, but maybe expanding that goal to do a more comprehensive look at the class size and what we need to do with that. Another suggestion that I have is when you were presenting the budget numbers to us, you talked about the really specific need for us to start paying attention to these recurring exemptions. So I'm wondering if we need to have a goal in there about creating a long-term strategy to address the building recurring exemptions to make sure that our spending is in line with enrollment. I'm not sure if that's exactly how I would word it, but I really do think that given the number of times you have told us to pay attention to this, I think that has to be part of our budget goals for this year, and somehow have a strategy to really look at how we would do that over the next, not just for this budget, but the next 2 to 3 years, 4 years.
Great, agreed. I will work on language to that effect.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I think that's it for me, Chris.
Okay. Maya?
Save the best for last. Yeah, so pretty much my questions were all around what my colleagues have already talked about. I definitely agree with having a total compensation language in there. I think that sets precedence for us in the future and how we have the conversations around compensation. So I'm glad that that is there. Other than that, we're good. Thank you.
Thanks. Savian?
Thank you. Yeah, I have a quick question and then about 2 comments. Thank you for this presentation, Ross. It is certainly a complicated endeavor trying to explain school finance, but this was clear. I have a question around ESSER funding in particular. Have we seen?
Savian? Actually, can you hang on to other questions and just hone in on the goals right now? And then we're going to open it up to broader questions later, unless you need to answer that question to get to the goals.
No, I can save that for later. I guess the one comment I had on this budget goal slide was on the 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth bullet point to maybe add a broad focus on early childhood education, particularly full day 4K, as that is a big multi-year investment that we want to continue to maintain in the district, as well as a enrollment strategy too. And then another comment was just kind of to build on Board Member Gomez-Schmidt's comment about recurring exemptions is, to the best of our ability to project our future budgets, maybe having a multi-year conversation in terms of how we want to build on or like scale up or scale down some of these multi-year investments or things that we want to phase out doing. I know that budget projection can be difficult, but I think that could be in line with our reoccurring exemption conversation.
Gotcha.
Thank you. So many of my comments on these goals were already stated by others. I want to strongly reiterate the focus on early childhood education as well as early literacy. I think continuing to invest in full day 4K is one of the smartest investments we can make as a district, both for children and also for positioning ourselves to hopefully increase our overall FTE numbers as the budget changes and hopefully as the legislature comes around and allows districts to count 4K students as full FTE. I would like to possibly tweak the language of the bullet about class size policy. I very much appreciate the need to try to reduce the number of sections below the minimum. This allows us to allocate resources elsewhere. At the same time, we have an awful lot of sections that are above the maximum as well. And we know that those large classes are causing issues in some schools and making it more difficult. I know at the high school level, we have a lot of social studies and English classes that are well over the optimal number and, sometimes even over the maximum. I would like to see us try to get more sections closer to optimal. I think that would be how I'd like to try to frame the class size policy, trying to I know it's impossible to get everything perfect everywhere, but try to, both limit the number of sections we have below the minimum, but also try to bring down some of these very large class sizes because they are impacting students' capacity to learn and also teachers' capacity to give students the one-on-one education they need, particularly coming out of this pandemic. And I completely agree that multi-age classrooms at the elementary level is an excellent strategy for us to use to try to achieve both those goals, to try to, bring more classes towards optimal, particularly at small schools. But we have to, again, I sound like a broken record, but we've got to be mindful of making sure this is a pedagogical strategy as well as a budget strategy. It can't just be about saving money. We need to be intentional about teaching and learning and, really using multi-age classes as a teaching and learning strategy for kids. Did I have
Chris, real quick, if I could, on the class size discussion, I do want to comment that a lot of our allocation decisions do target optimum as the intended strategy for a lot of our class size, but you mentioned the small school impact. In almost every situation where we're talking about small school class size impacts, the decision is between going over maximum or going below minimums. So some of our schools where the difference between 1 or 2 sections would mean a section of 14 or a section of 28, it becomes very difficult to have discussions about, especially straight grade classrooms, which is why the discussions about multi-age are always ongoing discussions and are definitely discussions or need to be considered for further discussion.
Yes, I completely agree with you that particularly at small schools where we are making those really hard decisions about being under the minimum or above the maximum, can we use multi-age classrooms both as a way to invigorate teaching and learning and as a way to try to hit our class size targets and try to get as close to optimal as possible.
Okay. So I will work with board members on any revisions we need to make to these goals. I'm hearing that we want to see a few more goals added to this list. As it pertains to these 5 bullets here, I don't believe I heard any language being struck on these goals, but just more focus on considerations around class size, what we might be able to do in the coming budget year, focus on or additional focus on early education, full day 4K, which might be an addition to bullet 4 on this slide. And I have other notes from there that I'm going to compile after tonight. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Ross. At this point, can we take down the slides and just open up to general questions, comments about anything at all in this presentation or noticed about the budget?
You bet.
Thanks. So please go ahead and raise your hand if you have questions or comments at this point. Savian.
Thank you. I am wondering, this is my question about ESSER in particular. I'm wondering if we've seen any precedent for districts citing staff shortage as a COVID issue and using that to invest in recruitment and retention.
I don't have any hard examples to cite on that. I do know that staffing shortages are constantly discussed in our regional groups, and the issue is not about is more about the fact that the job pool is drying up. If anyone's listening to any news stories lately, the rate at that people are just leaving their jobs of 10, 20 years is higher than we've ever seen. So we're adapting to a new job environment where the pool is literally shrinking because people are tired. They're burned out by the last 2 years, and it's very difficult to keep the high quality staff that we've had for many years now. So as a viable strategy, do we need to focus on identification, possibly even internally, of our own staff to increase our roles? Sure. But how we accomplish those goals is still going to be tied to our limited resources that we have available.
No doubt. And yeah, I guess I do ask that question because I would be interested in at least legally and using our ESSER $3 in a targeted way aimed at, recruiting and retaining staff in a variety of methods, understanding that this money is one time and not reoccurring. So yeah, I guess I think we could do some research around that in terms of if the federal government has accepted that rationale or will.
Ananda.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. I'm wondering if Dr. Jenkins was going to add something to what Savian said, or if I could ask my question before that.
Dr. Jenkins, did you want to go ahead and make comments before Ananda goes?
It looks like he's frozen.
I think he's frozen.
Yeah, I'm gonna go
Why
ahead.
don't you go ahead, Ananda? Yeah.
Ross, I really appreciate you sharing the that we have already launched on our website, the outreach to the community regarding what our community are thinking regarding to priorities for ESSER 3. I'm wondering what is the plan for sharing with us what are some of the trends that are coming up from the survey, and what is it going to look like to also scaffold things that this board has already lift up in regards to priorities? And I'm thinking about two in particular around bonus and mental health days for staff, and including bonus, the expansion of bonus to our BRSs and security staff as well.
Got it. So to answer your first question, the survey was launched earlier today. And though I have not had a chance to look at trending and collating answers, I'm going to be working with our communications team over the next several weeks to do exactly that. From what I understand, we've already received close to 500 responses to the survey since it launched at 11 o'clock, which is great. But I will be working with them hopefully by, let's target the operations work group, or at least via board update, some trending we're seeing in there so that you guys have some timely information about how we're going to do next steps. In regards to your second comment about bonuses tied to mental health days and or other hourly staff, I need to confirm. I do believe that there is a federal requirement that we do not put bonus payments on federal funds. So I don't want to state something that's incorrect, but I will certainly take another look at that. But my current understanding is that that's not allowable, and that we would need to look for other resources to address bonus pay for staff, which we have been doing in the recent couple of months for staff.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. I think we did have this conversation. One thing that I would appreciate from the communications team, I know you all have been working a lot. Both the website and the Facebook have been getting some really beautiful overhauls. But we really appreciate if there is some social, whatever we are launching, that there is some social media links that we can also share with our constituents as well. So that would make it easier. My only other comment is, the district and just most institutions just really have historically struggled to hear from voices of folks that have been institutionally and historically marginalized. So I would like to continue to just add this lens of, how are we reaching out to communities on the South Side, how are we reaching out to Black and Brown communities, how are we reaching out to English language, families that English is not their native language. How are we doing that? And I know that a lot of those outreaches are coming from our BRSs, as they are for many times the lifeline for many of our families. So I would love to hear the targeted approach to them. I love to make sure that they are also compensated for the increase of overtime and extra hours and above and beyond that they have been putting in. As our board president highlighted earlier in her comments, we are marking our 2 years of making it through this pandemic. So thank you so much. Mm-hmm. And I'll be leaving soon this meeting for another commitment, but I appreciate Board Member Carusi lifting this up for us.
Thanks. Dr. Jenkins, I know you had your hand up earlier. Did you have a comment?
Actually, I was going to comment on what Board Member Castro had gone into in terms of some of those retention strategies and using some of the ESSER more than just recruitment, but when we start talking about retaining, and as Board Chair said, Ali, that we have to look at right now, we're in this, and how can we respond differently? But retaining the current staff we have and giving the individuals who have an interest in becoming teachers, administrators, or whatever. So it's really put more emphasis in our grow your own, and that would too meet the ESSER 3, Board Member Castro, when you mentioned that. So some of our SEAs, teachers, whomever, we could really focus on growing our own right here and keeping that staff. Sometimes that proves to be even less expensive than going way out and getting others.
Other comments, questions?
If you don't mind, I had a very purely budgetary question. Has the COVID-19 pandemic hurt our revenues and limited our potential budget surplus? I'm just curious.
I'm sorry, Gordon, could you restate the last part of your question? Your
Yeah.
audio went off for me.
Yeah, no problem. I could just repeat the question fully if you don't mind. Has the COVID-19 pandemic hurt our revenues and limited our potential budget surplus?
It certainly affected our revenue stream in that I would say the enrollment trends have clearly indicated that there's either unease about public engagement in K-12 education, or just as changing desires of families to attend public education. We've lost approximately 1,500 students over the last 2 years between the 1920 and our current state. I do think that some other options available to our students has also had an impact on our resident enrollment, namely expansion of voucher and 2X charter programs, which is not tied directly to COVID, but has certainly impacted our ability to retain students within our borders. Finally, the real impact in COVID is uncertainty around the economy and the way our state legislature has framed our budget outlook for the coming years. And many of the things I went through tonight highlight that what we would have taken for granted or as a given as an inflationary increase in our budget from one year to the next is not currently something we can rely on. So it becomes increasingly difficult to do a lot of this on our own. We, as a public entity, are bound by the revenue limit authority that the state has set for us. And that design has been in place for over 30 years at this point. Actually, I believe we're coming up on 30 years. And without significant investments in that formula, school districts do not have a lot of room to maneuver.
Thank you.
Thanks. Chris?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions to start on the ESSER 3 information that you provided. Thank you very much. It's exciting to see that community feedback portal opened. One of the questions is the survey the way for both community at large and staff to give input on ESSER 3, or will there be another mechanism to receive feedback from staff in a more, and engage them in a more in-depth conversation on ESSER 3?
The current survey is open to both populations we mentioned. I need to check with our communications team on how staff or how people are identifying themselves in the survey. I believe there is a portion that you can identify if you are a staff member or a community member, but I need to confirm that. So I don't want to state that out of turn. But at the moment, it is currently the same portal.
Okay, that I think that would be great to differentiate where, yeah, the input is coming from. I think that would be helpful. And then I appreciate the analysis on ESSER 2 that you provided. I need a little more time to look at that in detail. I'm just curious, as we move through the ESSER 3 process, are we looking to do an analysis of where we've spent in ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 and where we see gaps? Like if there are gaps that or we need to continue to spend in this area because it has been really important for our schools. Is that going to be part of the ESSER 3 discussion?
Good point. There are certainly aspects of ESSER 2 priorities that we are asking the administration to review right now based on projects we put in place for this year and how those have been going. We've gotten some reports out on things like big ideas and other projects that are currently beginning in second semester. But some of those will lead to identification of gaps that we'll continue to discuss here at the board level and internally at the administration. So we know where some of our investments need to focus going forward.
That would be great. And then just a timeline, I guess, for the board with the portal opening and getting feedback from the public. What does the process look like for coming back to the board to then do a review and get our input on where, we need to do that investment? Like, what's the timeline for starting with ESSER 3?
So since the portal just launched, I do want to give the public and our staff time to give our feedback on items we know we need to focus ESSER 3 on, just based on the 5 buckets that the federal government has decided that we need to spend this money on. Once we get some of that feedback, we will be coming back to the board with some of those highlighted responses. In addition, we're going to start identifying areas that we know we can invest large amounts of funding on this grant. To just remember, $42 million is not going to be spent tomorrow. It's certainly going to require some large scale identification of buckets and areas that we can actually accomplish in the next 2 years. Because even if we have great ideas, we still have only 2 years to spend all these dollars. So we need to come up with ideas that are meaningful to the district and the community and find ways to spend them in due time as well. So to answer your question more directly, I do hope to bring feedback sometime in February for additional discussion. And the earliest we'd be bringing back any priority lists or things for us to review at a board level would be at March, if we are seeking any early approvals for priority actions as we've done in the past. Otherwise, we would probably bring our first brush at large scale ESSER 3 dollars at our preliminary approval in April, which would trigger then following up our additional community impact feedback through May and June.
Okay, thank you. That helps to clarify the timeline. My last question is on a specific one of the budget slides, and it's the one that has the initial revenue gap. And on the right side of the slide, it has gap closing strategies. So looking at the 4 things we need to do it's listed under budget realignment, the district-wide accounts, the staffing and workbook alignment, the review of central office department budgets and staffing, and the stop doing list. For two of those, I'm kind of wondering what our timeline is for that, because if we're going to have a preliminary budget by June, I believe the staffing workbooks go to the schools in February. So if we are doing that alignment, will we see that at the February work group before the staff and workbook go to the schools? Or how does that, or I guess, and that's a question for Dr. Jenkins, I guess, how do you see that working into our timeline here with the budget?
I think it's a process where we're going to begin to see some. We're still really right now recalibrating on some of the things that we've had in the workbooks as we talk about that stop do list. Just because they've been there, we're trying to really assess, even with some of the administrators, if those things still need to be there. So you'll see some coming up, but then we're going to come back with even further conversation, because we just don't want to make a one-off conversation without understanding the realities. We do know that we have to prepare for a different future, which we can get more return on the investments that we've been making. And I can say, and you know this, and we all know this, and I think this is one of the things, getting the input from our public, but also getting it from our staff. We're seeing that many people are recognizing that we have to repurpose a number of things that we're doing to get the maximum outcome, what we're looking for the future.
Thanks, Dr. Jenkins. And yeah, I think that we've talked about the stop do and how hard it is to stop things that we've started and how to analyze what to stop. And so I really look forward to us figuring some of those pieces out as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you for that question too, board member.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, Ollie.
Yeah, Ross, I want to ask specifically about our investment in assessment. I know that we ramped up a series of assessments this year to kind of see where students were at. I'm also hearing a lot from students and families and educators that those assessments are becoming a barrier to learning and an obstacle. In terms of what we're investing in, the last couple of years, we've made, specific investments also in kind of how we sub our schools, and some of that seems to not really be compatible at this point in time with the pandemic. So how are we reshaping our budget so that it doesn't echo some of what we've seen in the last 2 years? And how are we kind of calibrating where we're at in our investment in assessment for students?
Okay, a lot of questions there. So specifically, I know that we put some assessment investments on SR2, and annually we have assessments related to projects that are on an ongoing evaluation schedule, such as our OMGE, ELL strategy, and 4K assessment. I need to rely on some of my instructional colleagues here to discuss more about what type of assessments are planned for the coming years. But we certainly would want to look at what assessments are working and what are not working as part of that stop do review, so that we're not repeating some of the issues you're describing in the past, where there's kind of an assessment burnout of too many things coming to the table at once.
Right. And I think having that conversation ahead of the budget versus during the consent agenda would be profoundly helpful at this point, because I think a lot of board members are hearing similar things, that our investment in assessment is not working. And also, I think, we'll speak to that first, and then I want to talk to you specifically about substitutes, Ross. But I guess I'm looking to Dr. Pryor or Kaylee Jackson to speak to what we can anticipate in terms of our investment when it comes to assessments next year.
Good afternoon, everyone. In regards to that question, what I would recommend that we do is send you over our entire plan, not only the plan for the future, but the plan that we had rolled out this year. Of course, the plan that we had for our schools this year, because of COVID, it did not play out as we anticipated. But we'll be more than happy to send each board member the entire plan so that you can see all of the assessments by grade band. And, you can see the depth of assessments that we've had and planned for the schools this year. I think when we hear about assessments and we speak of it in a broad sense, it seems like a whole lot of assessments. But when you break it down per grade band, you see that we have really decreased the amount of assessments that we have done over the years. And Kaylee can talk to you a little more from it, but I will make sure that the team send out to you. Caroline can push that out to you. And she has also gone the extra mile of really breaking it down to show you the percent or the amount of time that we spend for each student during the course of a year on assessment. So Kaylee may want to add to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Pryor. I think you did a great job. We can certainly work with Dr. Caroline Racine-Gillis to send over the assessment proposal for next year. I would say that I echoed Dr. Pryor in that we have worked strategically to not give assessments for assessment's sake, but to utilize platforms that we are already using and the data that comes with them to be the data that we use to respond to student achievement. Therefore, it doesn't feel as though students are sitting in front of, a paper pencil test or engaging in assessments, again, just for assessment's sake, but we're really trying to utilize instructional resources that we already use on the day-to-day or the week-to-week to be that source of academic data gathering. But as Dr. Pryor said, Dr. Caroline Racine-Gillis has done the math to show the exact number of minutes that this year we have planned for students to take assessments and has compared that with national averages. So we are happy to send that along your way.
Thank you. And I guess I would say, if you're going to give us the information for this year, and you're saying this year we've taken a step back in comparison to prior years, I think that it's helpful to illustrate that. But what I'm really interested in is what next year is going to look like. So how does next year compare to this year? And if we are doing less assessment and therefore investing in less in assessment, how does our budget reflect that? And how do we speak to that so that our community understands that we're moving away from high stakes testing and assessments that echo high stakes testing and to some extent contribute to students' anxiety at a time when folks are really struggling with mental health. Thank you both so much for speaking to that.
Okay, thank you. I just want to add this too, and I think that was an excellent lift right there. One of the things I can assure you that the team has been very cognizant of that very fact. The assessment that we speak of are not typically our high stake assessments, and I get that narrative around that. But the bulk of the assessments that we will share with you and that we really roll out to schools is around basically assessing where kids are in regards to the curriculum that we're teaching. Number two, as a guide to support teachers in making the shifts that they need to make to ensure that they're meeting the needs of every student along the way. And it's lockstep with our school achievement plan. As we progress monitor the performance of students, that's a necessary process in that step, because if you don't have some form of assessments to inform how kids are performing within that content area, and then we're just guessing and waiting to the end, a lot of times you miss the support that students need along the way. And so I just want to make sure that the board and the larger community, the community at large, and I should say, understands that when we talk about assessment, is really to inform future instruction. So I just wanted to roll that out.
Thank you. Ross, I wanted to ask you specifically about substitute teaching at this point and our ability to staff substitutes. Over the course of the last 2 years, the board has had a budget that reflects a certain investment in substitute teaching, and we have not been able to spend that amount on subbing. We've not been able to staff subbing. And I guess I'm wondering what's going to make next year different than the last 2 years, and should we change our budgeting strategy around substitute teachers?
We certainly can look at that. It's something I've been hesitating to change for the last 2 years, uncertain exactly how the pandemic would unfold. As we all know, it's still not gone. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of a significant interruption to our K-12 experience. That being said, I do expect that our staffing levels and our substitute levels will eventually return to normal. If we need to revisit how much we're budgeting on an annual basis for subs to possibly invest in other areas, I'm certainly open to have that discussion. However, I would caution that one thing about the substitute budget that's been very hard to maintain over the years is how quickly it accelerates once we are back to full staffing levels. Since I've been with the district, it's been kind of a cat and mouse game for me to ensure that we are budgeting even enough for substitutes on an annual basis, such that when we think we're at full capacity and our absentee rate is X, our rates still increase every year. We have an adjustment based on our handbook changes in a given year, and the costs only go up. So we may be able to look at some temporary adjustments to those budgets to do some other things. But when we do return to normal, that budget's going to need to get restored quite quickly.
Ross, do you have any way of kind of predicting what getting back to normal looks like and what a timeline for that is in terms of staffing? So do we have kind of a plan for next year that informs our budget and says, this is how we're going to fill the vacancies of the district, and kind of resume a more normal relationship to that budget allocated for subbing? Or are there things we're doing significantly that change the subbing position so that our schools have greater access to resources around staffing in the immediate future?
I don't have a formal plan to share with you at this point, although I will say until we know exactly how many variants we're going to be dealing with over the next couple of months, it would feel premature at this point, given that we've still been doing this for 2 years, to speculate on how much our sub costs could go down or up, even in a 6-month time frame. One of the reasons I've been hesitant to touch that budget is for that exact reason, in that if we were to get back to full capacity, we had an extremely aggressive set of graduates ready to help us in the coming years, we'd be back up to full capacity without much recourse to get back to regular budget. So it's something we can continue to have a discussion about, but at this point, no, I don't have any hard predictions about where we're going to be come next fall.
Thanks, Ross. That's it for my questions.
Thank you. Savian?
Thank you. Yeah, I just had one quick comment on ESSER funding too. I just want to highlight, I think that we should definitely prioritize trying to use some of this ESSER funding for relocation stipends for folks who are choosing to move and come work with us, and also try to highlight, I know that the federal government extended the student debt repayment pause, but look at reimbursing student debt payments for staff if the federal government decides to unpause that pause instead of just abolishing student debt. And then also just want to highlight the need for some transparency around our assessment and learning evaluation tools. I definitely think it's important that teachers get timely information about someone's learning course or journey. And it is frustrating that we don't get state assessment data back until it's too late when they're on to the next year and too late to make adjustments for a particular time. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Savian. Since I'm not seeing any of their hands, I'll jump in with a couple of questions at this point. First of all, I want to echo what Ollie said about assessment. I'm glad we'll be getting a plan for assessment in this coming budget year. And in addition to the plan and what assessments kids will be given, I would actually like to get an assessment budget. I would like to know specifically what we're spending on each of these assessments. And I would like to include coaching on how to give assessments in that budget. So the ANET coaching as well as the ANET tests. If we're really serious about doing a stop-do list, I think we need to take a hard look at how much money we're spending on testing versus how much money we're spending on other strategies to educate and meet the social emotional needs of kids, especially given the tight budget year we're facing. Let's see. I guess my other comments would really be around workbooks. I'm glad to hear that we're moving towards including mixed grade classrooms in the workbook process, and encourage that to I'm hopeful that we'll get to see that when we go into the workbook and staffing discussion in February. I'm also very much on board with the conversations about how we can use ESSER 3 to address some of our staffing issues. I know that there's limits as to what we can do with that money that are imposed by the federal grant, and we have to work within those limits, but we can use that grant to hire people, particularly when it comes to addressing learning loss that has happened over COVID. I also know that staff attrition is not a new phenomenon in MMSD. For the past 2.5 years, we've been seeing pretty high rates of staff attrition, and they are picking up at this point with COVID. They seem to have gotten larger since last June. But I'm wondering, on one hand, we can't hire permanent staff on ESSER 3 because it's not permanent money. But on the other hand, I think we can look at numbers for the past couple of years, knowing that they predate COVID, and make some educated guesses about what staff attrition just might look like, and maybe do some preemptive hiring on ESSER, knowing that those people we hire on those temporary funds will be able to move into vacant positions in the next few years, so that we're stabilizing our staffing situation and not just being responsive, but actually being proactive. And we could hopefully be proactive in a way that helps us to diversify our teaching pool. So I would very much encourage some creative thinking around taking the long view of ESSER. We've got it for 3 years. We've been seeing pretty high attrition rates every year since before COVID. Could we make a conservative estimate of how many positions we might be able to take temporary staff and have them move into, because we can very safely estimate that many we'll see that kind of attrition each year, and use ESSER money to maybe preemptively hire people. If we have more staff up front, that's probably good. If we actually hired more people next year using some ESSER funds, that might help us with things like class sizes and addressing learning loss while we're still in this pandemic, knowing that 3 years down the road, we may not need have those needs for smaller class sizes quite as intensely to help kids recover and help kids just be spaced far enough apart. And we'd then have staffing in place to move into permanent positions. So I would really love to see some creative thinking with ESSER 3 along those lines. And then my last comment was just on the revenue forecast slide, the one that had the boxes and the dollar figures on it. Was that just for Fund 10 and 27?
That's for all revenue limit funds, which would be 10, 27, and 38, which is our non-referendum debt service.
Okay. Are we anticipating any shortfalls in Fund 50 or Fund 80?
At this time, no. Fund 50 is designed to protect itself if at all possible. If it does end up running a deficit, Fund 10 is required to kick in at year end to cover those balances. And Fund 80 has a revenue source outside of the revenue limit. We can either choose to raise fees and or tax levy to accommodate any changes in that fund.
Okay. And just as a final comment, and you don't have to do this right now because it would probably be an arduous math experiment, but I'm really curious, what would our per pupil revenue limit have looked like this year and in the coming year if we kept up with inflation? What actual dollar figure would we have needed to see from the legislature to actually just maintain at the rate of inflation? Because, despite the fact that we've got a few extra $1 million, I think we're actually looking at, a massive budget cut just based on inflationary rates. And it would be nice to wrap our heads around that. And, also maybe just, have some public messaging around the fact that we are not keeping up with inflation thanks to the legislature at a time when inflation is pretty intense. So,
right. I mean, we could certainly do kind of a thought experiment on looking at what that might look like over the last couple of years. Mitigating factors, other parts of the revenue would make that a little difficult to show, especially when declining enrollments factored in. But we could certainly look at what the revenue limit would have been in a more traditional sense on adding to the revenue limit. That's certainly a modeling and a thought experiment we can entertain at any time.
And I know your time is limited, but I wonder if just making it per pupil takes away the enrollment ups and downs, just if the state of Wisconsin were to increase the per pupil revenue limit at a rate that were to keep up with inflation, how many dollars would that have been? It would not have been zero. It would have probably been pretty significant. So,
well, it certainly would have been more than zero.
Way more than zero. So. All right, Ollie.
I'm really sorry I meant to ask this earlier, but I wanted to factor in TID closure and kind of our relationship with the city in terms of our long-term relationship to our budget. And Chris, I know that you can speak to this because you've been working really closely with our city partners in terms of the reality of our TIDs. And then Ross, if you wanted to chime in as well, I think it'd be helpful to talk to that greater context, because 85% of what fuels our budget is our local taxpayers, who we have to be pretty grateful for. And also, I think it's relevant to speak to how TID impacts the narrative we're creating around our budget moving forward.
Ross, do you want me to take that one, or do you want to take it?
I can start if you, but I mean, if you want to jump in, feel free. Correct. So we still have a number of TID districts that are either in the process of finishing up or have closed. We do have some closure revenue from TID 25 we need to consider. Just like everything else we're dealing with right now, everything that's coming from those sources is a one-time adjustment to the budget. So we can use our best thinking to do some really good things. But what we really need right now is recurring authority. But Chris, you may have more insight onto the TID Council than I do at this point.
I don't have a ton more, except that the city of Madison in particular is taking an approach to South Madison that relies on donor TIDs. So in doing that, it may be reducing the payout amount that we're getting at the end of a TID, and it also might be extending the life of a TID. But on the other hand, it's hopefully going to end up increasing the value of the property on the tax rolls. So I think, to make a long story short, I don't, Ross, correct me if I'm wrong, but other than TID 25, I don't think we're looking at any TID districts coming in with like windfall payouts anytime in the near future. And we're looking at actually some of the TIDs that have been successful reinvesting some of that revenue into South Madison strategy. Ross, is that correct? I don't want to spread.
That matches what I've heard at least. Yeah. So yeah.
So then just a quick follow-up question around that. Can we talk a little bit to the impact on our budget of the annexation of the town of Madison, which will happen next fall? So right before we kind of vote on this budget, the full annexation of town of Madison will be split between Madison and Fitchburg. And what are the implications we can anticipate in terms of that annexation shifting the property tax of those areas?
Fair for question. I don't have anything prepared to talk on that exact subject, but it is something that I have been hearing whispers about, certainly in recent weeks. And I'll be working with our legal counsel to identify some of those impacts in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you so much for speaking to both of those questions, Chris and Ross.
Are there any other questions or comments regarding the budget? All right, well, seeing none, thank you so much, Ross. That was a comprehensive and wonderful presentation. And I feel like hopefully you've gotten the feedback you need to move forward with this process and come back to us in February with more information about staff compensation and staffing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Real quick, Chris, I don't know if you were planning on moving on just yet, but I do want to highlight that in the materials for tonight, I did give a preview of what the Sr2 schedule looks like for the current year and some schedule revisions that we may take action on later this month. I've highlighted in the updated schedule some of the items that are either changing in purpose slightly or dollar amounts that are moving within the schedule. Many of these are non-substantive changes to the schedule. It just identifies where some of the priorities on the Sr2 schedule, as we approved in October, have shifted. For example, the summer semester program that we initiated as part of last year's budget development, which naturally would cross 2 fiscal years as it is summer school, is being repurposed into this upcoming summer session as a summer arts academy under the leadership of the arts department and curriculum instruction. Additionally, we had some LTEs identified in our social worker area on Sr2 to provide some initial supports. As it becomes harder to source our own counselors and social workers, I changed the language only to indicate that if we do engage in outside contract work for this, that we can still provide the competitive bids necessary to engage in these services yet this year. Some of these scopes and items are changing slightly in here as well. Under instructional supports, I did reduce the total for the teacher mentor project. Not that the project itself is decreasing significantly in scope, but this now reflects the annual amount that is planned to be spent in the remainder of 21-22, and there will be a secondary component coming back into 22-23 budget development on Sr2. There's an increase on this schedule based on other reductions for the ACT preparatory coursework that we're going to be discussing later this evening. And finally, there's some adjustments to the scope of work on some of the big idea projects. Some of the dollar amounts highlighted on this schedule are either reduced to show planned expenditures for the remainder of this year, pending further review in 22-23 budget development. And some projects are either ending or have reduced to their final amounts for this year, either indicating they're not continuing or just did not get off the ground. And then finally, what is left over in the reserve for future big ideas discussions is highlighted as a change for what is falling to that balance at this point in the year.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate that very much, and really appreciate the detailed information about where we're at with Sr2 spending. It's extremely helpful.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on. Our next agenda item is ACT prep. This is something that is going to appear in the consent agenda in the January regular meeting, is my understanding. So this is something that the board will need to act on, and this is an opportunity for us to have a conversation and ask questions in advance of that meeting. So Cindy, are you giving that presentation?
Good evening. Yes, Chris, I am, but I will let Dr. Jenkins kick it off if you would like to. And Melissa, I don't know if you can pull up the slides for me. If not, I can drive. Let me know.
If you're able to drive, that would be best.
Okay, so Cindy's going to drive. All right. Well, everyone, we're very glad to bring this presentation to you, and I'm so glad that we received the questions that we did in the budget presentation from Ross. Russ, excellent job and excellent questions by our board members. As we were talking about moving forward, as we're looking at where we are right now and where we've been over the last 2 years, and I think that was raised beautifully by Chair Muldrow. And what we're presenting now is just a part of it. We have a reality over the last 2 years. We have been in this somewhat state of flux, is still not quite knowing where we're going, but we know that we have to do something more than what we've done as we continue to try to make sure that we're safe with all of our students following the science and the work. We want to make sure learning is happening at its maximum capacity. We're using this opportunity as we have begun our year and continuing to focus as our priorities on early literacy and beyond, and recognizing where our students are, recognizing the learning loss, but also recognizing the fact that we need to move forward our students. This ACT presentation is just playing a part of what we're doing, as this is focused a lot on our secondary, meaning middle and high schools, but with the hope as we rise up our elementary students, this is going to become a part of our culture as we give our students transferable skills. Ms. Green, I am looking forward to the presentation, and as she presents, I look forward to the questions that we have, because we're ready to do this. Thank you, Ms. Green.
Great, thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. It is great to see you. First, I just want to frame that this is a singular proposal that we're putting forth, but it definitely is embedded into our current larger academic plan, as well as the future academic plan that we are working on. So both kind of the short term and the long view. And also, Chris, just to kind of clarify a little of what you said around consent. There will be a consent agenda item in January for a piece of the proposal, but as I talk through tonight, I'll talk about kind of multiple steps to it and consent agendas that will be forthcoming beyond just this upcoming month of January. I also think that this conversation is super timely, listening to the conversation that we just had around the budget, both thinking about assessments and what assessments mean and which assessments are most important for us to focus on. Also thinking about which assessments may create barriers and or open up opportunities for our students. So this conversation tonight around ACT, I think does both that, thinking about why this is an important high stakes assessment and how it can create many barriers for our students and or open up a lot of opportunities for our students as we think about this first goal here about ensuring our students are on track and ready for college, career, community. The proposal, I think, is going to definitely uplift that. Also thinking about our goal 2 and definitely thinking about our goal 3 with a focus and an emphasis on our African American students. I also thought it was important to kind of restate why this proposal is very important for us to consider for our scholars here at MMSD. What you have in front of you is our 10th grade reading data, and I think it mirrors much of what we see in terms of our elementary and our middle school data, but it also shows the significant gaps that we have happening with our students and the learning. And we know now with the learning loss that our students have potentially received over the last 2 years, this is really important for us to think about ways to create those opportunity gaps and close those achievement gaps for our students. This data here shows a multi-year set of data on our ACT, specifically that composite score. We know that composite score is very important for post-secondary entrance. And we also know that that shows the combination of all of the core skills that students are assessed on in the ACT. While we have done a better job in some areas compared to the entire state, I don't think there is anything here for us to greatly celebrate. I think we can do a better job overall for all of our student groups, and we definitely have some work to do to ensure that all of our students are having the opportunities for post-high school entrance in a way that we want. So why are we talking about an ACT preparation course anyways? I want us to think about this, not just about the assessment. As I mentioned, that assessment is high stakes, and that assessment does either create barriers or open up opportunities for our students with post-high school. But this ACT and or SAT preparation course does a ton more than just that. It really focuses on, one, those transferable skills that we know are critically important for our students as they leave us in MMSD and go on to life outside of MMSD. It also focuses on how students are able to prepare well for that test itself and those test taking strategies. We know that this opportunity can definitely focus on accelerating learning, which is something that we have been thinking about and working on over the last 2 years during COVID. We also know that it will help reduce that learning loss that many of our students have experienced, and also build general academic skills that are critically important for our students now and in the future. I heard Ali talk about this earlier, and I think this is one of the important things. What we've learned about these ACT preparation courses is that what they do is they also focus on skills and strategies to help students reduce that test anxiety. We know that test taking can be a super anxious process for our students, and so we believe that this opportunity will also help decrease some of that anxiety. I think it also will help build that agency and that efficacy in our students, while simultaneously decreasing that anxiety. We also know, depending on what students receive on their ACT score, it opens up opportunities for scholarships. And we know scholarships provide money for our students to be able to have more opportunities to consider for post-secondary. That's a critically important thing for us to think about. Higher test scores also just open up the doors for other schools that students may not have been considering. And one really important factor is it is free for our students. We know in the city of Madison, there are very few, if any, free ACT preparatory opportunities. We want this opportunity for our students. So what is it going to cost? We're thinking that this proposal overall over the next 1.5 years will be approximately $1 million. We know we
waste my money.
Oops, Ross, I think you need, who, I'm not sure, someone needs to mute, sorry. It wasn't you, Ross, I apologize. Oh.
That's Dr. Hicks.
Oh. Dr. Hicks, could you please mute?
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry about that. I'm going to just back up for a second. So this proposal that we're putting forth, we believe is going to cost about $1 million. And I'll talk a little more in detail of that. But we are splitting that between our local funds as well as ESSER funds. While this opportunity is going to be available for any one of our scholars currently in 8th grade through 12th grade, we also are creating an intentional targeted strategy to ensure that our students that could benefit from this the most, those being our low income students and our students that have been historically excluded. We are going to be super intentional about ensuring that these students not only understand what this opportunity is, but take advantage of this opportunity. And when is this going to occur? We are going to start with a small cohort in February, and I'll talk a little more about that. But then we see this opportunity extending all through next school year. We see opportunities that will open up this spring. We're definitely going to run some sessions over the summer through our structure of summer semester. And then we are also going to carry this into next school year. Again, we know, as Ali, I think, mentioned, we are hitting the 2-year anniversary, not an anniversary that we want to celebrate, but a 2-year anniversary of COVID. And we know that this opportunity will not just benefit students currently, but it'll also be beneficial next year. I'm going to talk a little bit about this first upcoming opportunity in February. I'll talk a little bit about our communication plan, and then I'm going to actually pause for anything that needs to be clarified and any questions. Our first opportunity is really focused on our current 11th graders. Our 11th graders take the ACT in March. That is their state required day to take the ACT. We want to have this opportunity for our students, one, just to build that academic skill and focus on transferable skills, but also to be an extra boost for students that have potentially had that learning loss. So our 11th graders have the opportunity to take this first preparatory course starting in February. It will happen on Saturdays and on Mondays. It's a total of 16 hours. 8 sessions, 2 hours each, and it will be all virtual. So students can access this from their home or wherever they so choose. We've already started to do some outreach around this. We've been working with our counselors, our MSCs, our BRSs, our principals and assistant principals in order to get the word out. We're working with our communications team on a larger communication plan. I think Ananda brought this up, and I think this is really important. We know that we haven't always reached our students and families that can benefit the most from some of these opportunities. So we are working on a media plan. We have a website built out. We're focusing on social media, and we're going to really leverage our community partners to help us with getting the word out. I still don't believe that that's enough. So my call to action to all of our board members is, once we talk more about this proposal, is thinking from all of you how you can help us also get the word out, or what ideas you may have to ensure that those that have been historically excluded are taking advantage and understand why this opportunity is so important. The other thing that we are doing is we are going to open up this opportunity for our teachers to participate as well as learners. These first few rounds are going to be run by experts that have done this work before. We also know some of our teachers would appreciate being part of these courses and or could learn a lot alongside them, so that we're able to build our own internal capacity and be able to begin to have these types of sessions run more often internally with our own staff. So we see this as a great professional learning opportunity for our staff as well. I am going to pause there. I am going to take us off screen share, Chris, if that's good with you, to open it up for questions and for a discussion.
Thank you, Cindy. Let's just raise your hand if you've got questions or comments. Ollie, or not Ollie, Gordon, I'm sorry.
Thank you. First, I just want to say this is pretty exciting. I know for me, I had to use a lot of private sources to my college prep programs to get ACT help, and to see, the district investing, in this for all of our high school students is surely equitable. And I do believe it will yielding really, high returns in terms to like higher ACT composites. My question would be is that how will you encourage engagement? Now you said there would be a virtual component of this, and I just want to know, because you know how virtual activity can be. So how will you encourage engagement among the students who are taking place in the virtual aspect of this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gordon. Let me first say that the first session, kind of targeting our juniors, that's 16-hour, will be virtual, and there'll be live recorded sessions. The reason why I think it's important for teachers to participate as well, as we see teachers as a bridge also to help with that engagement and follow up with students when they're back in school. Outside of that first opportunity, we are going to run some face-to-face sessions, because while we know the virtual creates more flexibility for some students, especially on those Saturdays, we know that other students would benefit from a face-to-face. That's also why I mentioned you'll see multiple consent agendas coming through. This first one will be the one I kind of went into detail. We're talking to a few other vendors about small group face-to-face opportunities that we think will be really beneficial both in the spring and also in the summer. I think the summer provides a great structure of what already exists through summer school, where we run a virtual high school and we also run a face-to-face. So we can do both of those in the summer. I think we'll learn a lot from both of those in order to kind of think about what the rest of those sessions may look like in the fall. I was going to say one other thing, but I don't remember. So I will pause, and if it comes to me, I will come back to what else I was going to say.
Thanks, Gordon. Savian and then Chris.
Thank you. I definitely think something like this ACT prep, so long as colleges and universities still require an ACT score for admission more broadly, is necessary, especially considering that, folks with means and with wealth can afford to have these opportunities, and folks, who are experiencing poverty or lower income cannot afford these types of opportunities. So I definitely think this is something that's necessary to equal the playing field, so long as those universities and colleges still require an ACT or SAT score. I guess my question is, so it sounds like this will occur over the weekends, most likely virtually. Will this be, an optional class for students who think that college is in the future for them? And then 2, will students be able to take, or I guess will completion of this course result in students receiving academic credit for participation?
Yeah, thank you, Savian. Great questions. I'll start with the last one. Yes, students will get elective credit for taking the course. So that is just an added benefit. To the first piece, yes, I think the thing that I think about in terms of post-secondary institutions is there's a lot that is unknown right now. While many have waived the ACT, many also still use the ACT as a potential decision maker in entrance, meaning they say if you are not going to take the ACT, you must have a GPA of X, right? And so I see that we still need to think about the ACT and ensure that it is not a gatekeeper for our students, and provide every opportunity for them to perform well on that. The second thing is we don't actually know the future of what post-secondary institutions are going to decide about the ACT. So while I talk about kind of this first opportunity short-term for our juniors, we know when we're thinking about as young as our 8th graders and 9th graders, 10th graders that can benefit from this opportunity, we want to continue to build that skill so that they can do their best possible on the ACT, not knowing what post-secondary institutions are going to do about that. that. So that's kind of where we are about that. The last question that you asked was about during the day. That is something that we definitely are thinking about for the fall. And that's why I say this proposal is quite broad right now in terms of how we see it, not only for this school year, but going into next school year. And that this could be an opportunity for students to take during the day, during their schedule, so that there are no other barriers or anything else that may be interfering or impacting them to take that. So that is definitely something for the fall. I hope I answered all three of your questions.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're on the same page in terms of leveling the playing field and, I guess providing as many incentives and flexibility as possible to eliminate those barriers to participation, and just taking a realistic approach that this is the game as it is, and we want to level the playing field. And everyone has a unique application. For some folks, an SAT or ACT score may make up for a lower GPA. For others, with an already high GPA and good references, it's a unique application for each individual. So thank you. And yeah.
Yeah, one last thing I would just say about that is while this also is a great benefit for hoping for students to do well on the ACT, I think that two other things are just as important. This opportunity is just academic skill building overall, which we know benefits everybody. And then that scholarship piece, I think, is so important that we sometimes overlook. And that is something that can be hugely impactful and a game changer for many of our students. So that as well, in terms of how that will help our students, I think is important to highlight as well. Thanks, Savion.
Chris.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I am at the Wisconsin Association for School Boards Conference, and so I have to run to a meeting. I'm representing the board here over the next couple of days. So just to let you know, I'm going to ask questions, and then I'm going to leave really quick so I can follow up with you later too this week. So thank you for bringing this proposal to us. I think for a long time we have, ACT has been important, and there has been some access to it at the high school level as far as us giving this test to everybody, but we've had some online tools and things available, but I think this engagement piece and this really making it more available to more students is going to be really important. One question I had is just about the timeline for our juniors. So the juniors are going to be taking the test in March. 4 weeks is really short to prepare and hope to change a score. And so I guess I'm wondering if one thing we might want to add on for our juniors is, could we extend the timeline of the preparation and then provide access to the June ACT if they want to take it again or something like that? So it gives like a longer access point for preparation for students who want it. So that's just one suggestion. And I don't know if that's possible for this year or not, but just the February is a really short timeline.
Yeah, Chris, you bring up a really good point. Yeah, the kind of longer you stretch that prep out, the better, more impactful it is for students, the better they do. I think that is definitely something we can consider. I've thought a lot about the difference between the access for students to take the ACT in March, and then also what that means for many students that will take it again in June or even in September or October. Yes, I like that idea. I'll take it back. I don't have a direct answer for you, but I like the suggestion to think about what that might look like for students. We also know the one thing that is like front and center in my mind is the ACT in March is the universal access opportunity. And so what can we do for that universal access? But I think you bring up a good point about June.
Great. And I really appreciate the discussion about the purpose of the ACT and if schools are using it anymore. I think the highlighting of the importance for scholarships and what that has potentially to offer students if they are able to improve their score is really, really important. So Savion, thanks for asking that and thanks for highlighting that. Another question that I had is just, I was taking a peek at our own data analytics, and we have a visual analytics on our research page. that has the distribution scores for students taking the ACT 9, the Aspire 9 and the Aspire 10, and then the ACT 11. And that's for 2019. And I'm just wondering if we can update those as we go along. And I think it's really important to look at the distribution of students and where they're starting from, and then maybe tailoring what the students are going to get for that preparation based on where they're starting. I think that's a really important point with any of the programs that we're going to select, because I know that's how they work. And so trying to figure out what that means as we bring more proposals forward. And then just my last question is about timeline wise, when will we be getting the broader proposal and the larger vision for how this is going to work for 8th grade, up to 11th grade students?
Yeah, let me answer your first question in terms of measuring progress. The data team, I don't know that they're on here, but I'll make sure that they have updates. So one of the great things about the current vendors that we're working with is the idea of a diagnostic or a pre-assessment, right? So students take that diagnostic or pre-assessment. So we get a really good understanding of both what their ACT score would look like pre the course, as well as diagnostic in terms of areas of focus, right? If a student needs to be spending more time in the writing section, more time in the English section, etc. So we'll have some good data to look at, both to analyze pre as well as then how students perform on the actual assessment. The challenge I will say is, and this is something for our internal research team, is the access to ACT data outside of that universal time that we take at the state level, that March 8th. So when students take it individually, it's a little different. So that's something we'll just have to look into. And then your second question. Oh, the proposal. I was like, what was the second question? Sorry. The proposal. I hope for February. I think we'll be set for February for sure. We have a draft of the actual kind of larger proposal, and just some of the costs and some other things are being shored up right now. But I think for February for that.
Okay.
I see Dr. Jenkins has his hand up, so let me just pause because maybe he wants to chime in a little on that. I know you have to jump, but let me just pause real quick.
I just wanted to say to Chris about the diagnostic, which you went into, Ms. Green. We're going to do the diagnostic. When we do that, that's when we're going to really target intentionally some of our families in which we consider to be those individuals historically not having the opportunity to participate. There would be an invite for an adult to attend with the scholar themselves. And this is where we break down the diagnostic is broken down with the families from the pre-assessment that's taken. And then there's going to be the commitment to work together to ensure that the playing field is really level for all students too. So that was a great question that you asked there, Board Member Gomez-Smith. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Jenkins. And I really like that idea of engaging the whole family in the discussions about this, so that everybody understands the purpose. Last sort of out of the box, like thinking comment, I think, that state level ACT, we only have the 11th graders in the building during that time, but maybe we could use that date to actually provide a diagnostic for our 10th graders. Obviously the state would not be grading those. We would have to do that ourselves, but it would provide an opportunity to have that a year ahead of time. And then you start doing, the work ahead. Just like an out of the box thought there for how that might work in the future.
Yeah, in the future. Thank you for that. That's a great idea. Have fun at your meeting.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Maya.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to express my excitement in gratitude for pushing and making sure that this is something that we can do as a district. So kudos to the team, the education, the instruction team, and kudos to your team, Dr. Jenkins, for really trying to push this forward, and kudos to you. I think just a couple comments. I think that this is one way that we can attract students to our district in high schools. I think that, and it's not just only students in our surrounding areas, but it's students that come from all different backgrounds. I think that it is a way to attract folks who want to be here and families who want to be here. Thinking about ensuring that these opportunities for families do exist. I think what Dr. Jenkins mentioned about engaging the full family is super important, especially for our families who, college, they may be the first in their family to go to college. It increases access, for our immigrant families, our families who are, trying to escape the poverty line. And so I think, being able to offer that is an amazing feat for our district, especially coming as a student who also was the first person in her family to go to college. And we didn't know anything about ACT. We didn't know anything about having to take the SAT or ACT. And I found out late and, didn't study and whatever, and just had to go off of pure knowledge. So offering that, I think is really great. I think my questions, or if they could just be comments too, or statements, is that ensuring that it's equitable across the board. And so I know that our district, certain families and certain folks in our city are able to access opportunities. And even though we may make this as open to all students and all families, making sure that the families who usually don't have access to these opportunities actually have that, not necessarily priority access, but that they are continuously reached out to ensure that the kids are enrolled in. Some of this is super important. I think about how we achieve that, maybe working with the community to also utilizing the board, but also making sure that we utilize the community as well. And maybe that's a larger, broader conversation that's not just only at our schools. And we're not only doing it with our schools, but we're partnering with other organizations to offer space, and maybe working with the testing sites to, I know that they were like Saturday mornings or something like that. And, for some folks and some teenagers, that is the only time that they are working. So also making sure that we have a way for it to be broad and not just only specific times. So those are my comments, my questions, I guess, if you want to answer them, but I just wanted to express my gratitude for this. I'm really excited that this is happening.
I think they're mostly comments and I'm taking them in. I would say I agree with you in terms of ensuring that students and families that would benefit the most from this opportunity, we've got to ensure that they are being able to take advantage of it and getting those spots. Yes. And then in terms of the community, that is one thing that we started talking about, and I'm hoping to do more outreach for that in terms of thinking other spaces where it would be easily accessible. And off the top of my mind, I think about our South campus for Madison College, right at the transfer point, and being able to use their space. So that is stuff that is not fleshed out yet, but definitely part of our thoughts and is going to be considered. So I appreciate both of those things that you've mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just make one last thing I just thought of. Also, increasing access isn't just only making sure that the space and times are there, but also transportation. So it'd be great to work with the bus line and to make sure that we have transportation to the bus passes or whatever else, and meals and things like that. So, because sometimes those tests are at awkward times where children may not be eating. And we all know you got to eat it before you can actually expend your brain power. So Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
May I just jump in one part here? I was trying to hold it back, but I'm just so excited about this. And we began already having conversations working with our community partners. And there's no way to say it other than just our community partners who are Black and Brown. We're going to work with Central. We're calling them in. We're calling the Urban League in. We're going to be calling our pastors, individuals. When I say that we're going to target our students who have historically had this opportunity. And then there are some students as well who just the affordability piece, regardless of their race. You know, we just know this has not been something typically. This is a very expensive preparation that typically the privilege are the ones who are mostly use it. And even myself with my own child, but not everyone can do this. Or even all my siblings can't afford it for their own children, you know? So we as a community, we say the schools in the community, the communities in the schools, this is going to be our opportunity to work closely together and come up big in our community and take our equity goals very seriously with this particular preparation. And I think that I'm so thankful that we have Cindy Green and our team, Dr. Marvin Pryor, leading this, and we're going to do an excellent job with this. And I thank you, board members, for having us come here tonight and give you an opportunity to hear where we're coming from. This could be that thing to move us from this 2 years of just being paralyzed, quite frankly, helping our students. It won't be the only thing. It's just a part of the longer vision. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon, and then Ollie.
Yes, I had a question about how will we, work with the already established ACT preps that's going on? Because, Avid, they do their own thing. I know Upward Bound has their services as well. So how will we try to work with those groups to see students are, trying to learn the same exact thing, or, will we just continue to do their own independent prep? And my second question would be, are we going through a service provider such as, Princeton Review or Kaplan Test Prep Services? And for my last one would be that, what can we take away from, Zillow? On Zillow, there's already ACT prep on there. So what can we take away from the use of that service, and how can we learn from it so we can better this one?
Excellent questions, Gordon. In terms of Avid, Upward Bound, and some of our other pre-college like People and ITA, we are definitely in collaboration with all of those to understand. The great thing about Avid is in my department, so I know it pretty well and I know what's happening, and they use a lot of the work in Zello, which is the method test prep. So this to me is not supplementary, almost the accelerated version of what we do in Avid, and also what we've learned that happens in People. So it won't be duplication, which is great. In terms of what we have already is we do have what we call method test prep, which is kind of a universal curriculum access in Zello. And Gordon, I'm not sure if you've used it before. Students, any student in high school, so all 7,000 students can access it at any given time through their college and career platform, which is called Zello. What it doesn't have is that direct instruction. It doesn't have the direct instruction from the experts to work directly with the students. It has practice questions, and it has some curriculum for the teachers to also embed into their courses. So I see that as a small step towards curriculum access to some practice, but I don't see that as the gap closing method that I see these opportunities as, especially with that acceleration and the need to really focus on some of that learning loss. In terms of vendors, yes, we have looked at, gotten quotes from a multitude of vendors, and I believe we have it narrowed down to a few that we are going to use. We are not using one vendor. We are going to create a couple different opportunities with different vendors to see how they all work out, to also think about what that looks like for next year. The first one that we are working with, which is the consent item that will come forth in January, is Kaplan. And Kaplan, many people know, is well known. There's a couple others that we are looking into also, and I'll make sure that those are in the proposal for February. I hope that answers all of your questions, Gordon.
Yes, I believe it does. Thank you, Ms. Curry.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Ali?
Gordon, I so appreciate those questions. Cindy, thank you so much for this presentation. I want to ask really specifically, how many students do we anticipate will participate? So, you know, we're creating this kind of large umbrella, hoping to get the students who are most vulnerable involved. We're investing $1 million or close to $1 million. What does that mean in terms of how many students actually get to be a part of this? How many slots are available? And what's the difference between how many kids can participate versus how many kids will participate? And are we kind of thinking about that?
Yeah. Good questions. I think overall, to answer that first question, total, I see anywhere between about 4,000 to 5,000 students based on that budget of 1 million. This first round that you will again see in January, I hate alluding to the end of the month, but this should be helpful, is right now for up to 200 students. However, based on what we have seen thus far from, we have about 2,000 11th graders, just to provide a total number, we're about 2,000 11th graders. We set it for up to 200 students, but that number is flexible. And what we wanted to do was first to kind of just gauge this first round. It is kind of a short window to engage students and families. And if we have more than 200 students and families interested in this opportunity, we've already talked to Kaplan. They can definitely open up more seats and we can go from there. But right now we're thinking about 200 for this first round. And then for each subsequent kind of session that we will run in those different times, those numbers will be based on need, but total about 4,000 to 5,000 students overall.
So 4,000 to 5,000 students over the course of the next year?
Correct.
Will benefit from these services.
Correct.
One of my, I guess, more complex questions is when I was in high school at MMSD, I took SAT, ACT prep with Doug Buell at East High School 5 days a week. It was one of the best classes I've ever taken in my life. And one of the things it did was make me incredibly critical of the ACT, because Doug Buell did a really good job of teaching us how much the company that makes the ACT makes selling this test to children. This test has been used as a gatekeeping strategy that has kept students of color out. And so helping students of color meet a racist expectation isn't equity, y'all. I appreciate the enthusiasm around this conversation, but that's no, that's not equity. And so looking at the test critically and the history of the ACT, one, if we really want this to be an equity strategy, doesn't it make sense to embed it in the school day in school for students, so that students who work, students who babysit siblings, students who don't have stable internet connection or stable housing can participate in this? When we talk about our most vulnerable youth, I want to name those kids, although I'm not naming every intensely vulnerable situation our students experience, and I know that. But also, you know, what does it mean to not have this embedded and to have, you know, up to 5,000 students get to participate in it? What does it mean in terms of producing results, I guess? And so what are we hoping to achieve? Are we hoping that students have higher ACT scores and are more likely to get into college? And if so, for our Black and Brown students, how are we going to demonstrate that this was an effective use of resource and an effective strategy to invest in their success?
Yes, and that is a complex question. I will start, and then if any of my colleagues want to chime in, but I will do my best. So first, I think you bring up a really good point about during the school day. And I, like as I mentioned, I do think that is one of the things that we would like to consider for the fall. I think we are not able to embed it during the school day as a course this year because, as you know, courses are kind of up and running. And we know that second semester starts Monday. But I do think that next year, that is a different conversation. And I think that is definitely possible. And kids getting credit. And to your point, Ali, some of our students that are wage earners or work extra hours and or athletes. I mean, that's another example. A great way to think about that. So thank you for that. And we will take that back, and that's a great consideration and definitely doable. I hear you on the test itself. And I also want to go back to what I said in the beginning. We also know that that test without the performance on it can be a barrier in itself for our students, right? And so what we want to do is not just focus on, yes, we want students to do well on the ACT so that they have opportunities of choice for post-secondary and scholarships, but we also know that the content of what they are going to receive is academic skills that is going to benefit them beyond, and those transferable skills about thinking critically and being able to analyze that are beneficial for them outside of an ACT, outside of a post-secondary institution for life itself. And I think you had a third part that I didn't answer. So let me see if Dr. Jenkins wants to chime in, and then I'll add on if needed. So thank you.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you for your response to that, Ms. Green, and thank you for the comment and questions that you asked there, Chair Muldriff. And let's just all talk about the realism of where we are. We're in America, in assessments themselves, and why we talk about them a lot of time, because they're rooted in deep racist thought, racist ideology. And you used to be able to go to college and you didn't have to even take an ACT. So this is much deeper than this one conversation that we can have here tonight. And I don't anticipate us leaving here all being calibrated on the same point about what is going to be equity. What we know is the reality that historically these tests have been used as barriers for students to continue to persist towards any of their dreams, and college students who are well capable because of just the historical gaps in prior performance. I won't even say achievement, prior performance based upon the system in which we have, but it's our reality. And in terms of when we start looking at wanting to have that goal, Black children and youth will excel, well, the question that Dr. Odom asked over and over about the reading and what are we going to do? We've been asking this question. I came to Madison in '93, we were asking the question then, what have we done about equity? I don't think that we can raise our heads up real high and say that we've done much to narrow those gaps. This is an opportunity to give students transferable skills, as came through in the presentation. But I think it's not only just for our students who are Black and brown, or students that you reference as most vulnerable. Will it clear the entire equity gap? I don't think so. Will it give our students a better opportunity, particular students who have just gone through this dual pandemic, who have a lot of anxieties right now about test taking? We're going to continue to force assessments on our students. And I do think we need to break through and look at things differently. But for right now, this is part of it. Putting it during the day, scheduling timeline for next year, we could be bold and just go ahead and push through. It'd be a little bit complicated to make it a little bit past that time schedule for starting the schedule. But our end goal would be to have this assessment, we talked about it, during the day, so every student can have access to it. And I think when we're looking at Kaplan and Cambridge, you can go and research, but those are probably the leading two vendors out there, even though we have some other smaller vendors that we know too that can be very successful, particularly with reaching a particular group of our students. So no, I don't think it is the full equity strategy, Chair Muldriff, but I think this is a good step in the right direction for all of our children in our district. And this is something that you haven't seen someone really reaching out and trying to do it across the district demographically speaking that looks like ours, but we've got to start thinking how we're going to move forward. This won't be the whole answer, but when you see the whole academic plan, you see how it plays into what we're trying to do for all of our students. And we just can't do anything about the fact that this is the system we have, and it's rooted deeply in some racism. We have to say it is what it is, but we have to teach our children how to navigate it as well. And our staff, and us, all of us have to have the mindset. I'm done, sorry.
So I think the most relevant question that I asked, and I did ask 3 questions, and I think you both touched on the first 2 questions, but the most relevant question is what are the results we're going to produce, and how are you going to bring those results to the board and to the community in terms of how many students participate in this, and how many students benefit from it, and what those benefits look like in terms of is the benefit we're talking about young people scoring higher on the ACT, and is there data that proves that this strategy will result in higher test scores in terms of the ACT, and is that part of what's driving our decision to use this approach?
Yeah, first of all, let me say this. I think no test, no assessment should be about the score. No score is more important than the child. I think when you look at preparing students, there's a lot of anxieties into even us as adults taking some forms of an assessment. But I think we have to equip our students with the necessary navigational skills so that they become comfortable themselves to sit down and take an assessment. These transferable skills, if you're going into an articulated skill trade, if you're going right to the workforce, articulated careers, you're going wherever. When you're doing this type of preparation program, it's equipping you with these transferable skills. And that's what's most important. If a student comes ACT score, great. They don't, it doesn't mean anything in terms of the value of that individuals. And I would ask, first of all, I'm not a person who even like assessments, but I know they're necessary because children without data aren't going anywhere, and data without children is really incomplete. It's the whole humanization that we got to bring to this whole process we're looking at. And I really hope no one is thinking that we're going into this for the whole point of raising school. Now, residually, will you have some children do better because they acquired some skill sets? That is my hope. Will they feel better about themselves? That is my hope. And the complete plan of what we're looking at also is to bring in psychologists with our students to walk them through this in terms of it's just taking another step in life. It's much more than just a test. If this is just about ACT score, because I've seen students with perfect ACT scores who are a nervous wreck. And I've seen students with a 16 on ACT persist through life and go get a PhD. In fact, I've seen some with a 9 and go get a PhD. So it's not about the test score, but I think it's about our approach, the whole child, and doing this together.
In terms of the results and the effectiveness of this, when will we see that, and how will we know whether or not it's effective, and when will that be shared with the board and the community in terms of how many students participate in it and how effective this strategy is or has been?
Yeah, you heard earlier, Ms. Green said we're hoping to target 4,000 to 5,000. It's a cumulative approach. We will start with the small amount of students that we talked about this spring, targeting the juniors, and there may be a few others, but that's what we're going to have. And I think we have to put this is one that we need to put a community dashboard, one to come back to the board on regularly to share, because the success of this will depend upon how well we can not only engage our staff and our students, but also our community. There's been a misnomer that this is only for certain groups of individuals. And quite frankly, I was that child, just like Board Member Pearson said. I was just happened to be competitive. That's why I scored on ACT, scored like I did, made the score that I did, but I didn't know anything about the ACT. Honestly, my family, I first graduated from college, and I just went off like most of us. And I would even spread that more than even just people who are of color, direct correlation with poverty and your preparation for the ACT. That's another characteristic out there. So we will come back regularly, sharing and also sharing the best practice. Gordon mentioned other forms of preparation. He's right. There are many things out there we can use. And even your teacher,
may have been right too, in terms of these corporations. Let's not kid ourselves. They do make money off some of the things we're doing, but the books that we buy, they make money. But how can we take the best of the resources we know, bring them together to give our students the best holistic experience? And it's no test. The state exam, the assessment, I'll say that. I'm not for that. I'm just not for assessment just for the sake of assessing our children. But if it can be a metric for how we can use it in a way not to weaponize it against our children, a lot of times this is what's happening. So this is a rebirth of how we can approach moving forward with the other things that we're gonna have to do as we continue in this pandemic. I'm not as optimistic as most, thinking that it's going to end next week. We're going to be here for a while. So we're going to have to start thinking about how do we take a holistic approach to learning that includes the humanity of the child, the humanity of the adults. Our teachers too are breaking down during this time. Our students are breaking down. So we'll come back regularly, presenting to the board. We want your feedback. We want the community feedback. But at the end of the day, we want to have healthy children who are graduating from college, who can graduate from high school. If students go to college, and if not, they can go on into the community and do.
Dr. Jenkins, you're breaking up, but I see that Dr. Pryor and Kaylee Jackson have joined us as well. And so I'm curious if they wanted to speak to some of this conversation with us. And thank you all for joining us.
Okay, thank you. And I have to step out to the conference with Chris right now. Dr. Pryor is going to take over from now. Sorry about that, but thank you for hosting this tonight on the agenda, Board Member Carusi. Thank you. Dr. Pryor.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. I would say between Sydney Green and what Dr. Jenkins shared, it really covered a lot of ground here. One of the other things that I would like to add to this is that as we were thinking about this initiative, we were thinking about our strategic goals, and as we were looking at, all of them actually, because it applies to all. One of the things that I struggle with every day is how do we eliminate all of the barriers that exist for some of our students, and particularly our Black and Brown students. The economic factor, right? When I think about access, another thing. When we were talking about this, we talked about the learning loss. I agree with Dr. Jenkins in that this is not about supporting our students to score higher on these assessments. There's so many other things that take away from this, getting students to think critically and analytically, about assessments or just any course content area. Someone mentioned earlier, and I think is Chair Muldrow, were like, how will we know that this is an effective strategy for our students? Unfortunately, with all of these assessments, an initiative that we're talking about right now, it's associated with an assessment. There's a pre-assessment, there's a post-assessment to show growth where students are. But are we just concerned about that growth? No, there's so many other elements that's associated with this. The confidence of students, when you build that confidence and realizing that, hey, I can do this if I choose to go on to college. I can do that. I heard the question earlier about colleges and universities kind of moving away from these assessments. Yes, as we talk about accelerated learning, this falls right within that realm of accelerated learning, and introduces students to a curriculum that is really high level, for some of our own students. I heard someone mention, I think it was Meyer Pearson, mention, elevated the fact that we have to make sure that it's accessible for students. Should we do it during the instructional day? I'll be honest with you, I am a little concerned that during the instructional day, we create some of the barriers that we have now, a course for the haves and the have-nots, the elitists, right? I think the quite appropriate question is what Maya raised, is that how do we ensure that we have access for them on the weekend, on a Saturday? What do we do? We have to lift those barriers that exist. Is it transportation? We do that. You know, if it's, you know, if it's responsibilities at home that they have to do, we have to work around that as well to make sure that we eliminate those barriers. And so from my perspective, it's about opening a door that has traditionally not have been open to many of our students. And I have to say this, you know, when you look at the cost, you know, I used to say this as a high school principal. When I took over a school with a 17% graduation rate, and there was always debate whether or not it was 17 or 27%, but in 4 years, we saw 100%. But some of the initiatives that we had were very costly. And one of them was a Saturday school program. We went all out for it. And the community would ask whether or not it was worth the investment. And I would always respond, you know, yes, it was worth the investment. And when you take the long view and see the results of that investment, it's definitely more than the investment that we paid up front. And so, you know, this is a huge, huge, huge step. But I will say this, what everybody, I hear from a lot of people around here is that this is Madison. You know, we do not question, you know, the cost of what it takes to some extent, of what it takes to really give back to our students in a real way. And so I do see this as not only an equity strategy, but I see this as a part of the AL offerings that we have to our students. Kaylee, you have anything?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Pryor. I will say first and foremost, thank you, Cindy Green, Dr. Pryor, and Dr. Jenkins for your remarks. I agree with them all. And I also just appreciate the questions and the conversation. One of the things that was lifted was how do we embed this into the classroom? And so I want to lift that. Our mission, part of our mission, the goal of our mission is that we are preparing students to be college, career, and community ready. And one of the things that Dr. Jenkins lifted is that, yes, the ACT program, Kaplan, whatever, you know, the resource is, that it is a preparation program. I agree with that. And I would also lift and extend that we too, as a public education system, are a preparation program. Right. And so the way, when I think about high stakes testing, just in the term high stakes means that there is something to lose, right? There's something at stake. What we want to do in order to ensure equity is that we are working on the daily to align our curriculum so that our daily curriculum, so that every day when students show up, they are engaging in curriculum that is preparing them for college readiness. So yes, we're talking about the ACT. Yes, we're talking about specific programs. And also we're talking about how we learn from those programs and how we take the rigor of that content and the rigor of those questions and the rigor of those tasks and embed them into the everyday learning that is happening throughout K-12, quite frankly. When we think about accessibility, there's no greater accessibility than coming to school every day. Right? Every day, students should be walking into a classroom where they are engaging in curriculum that is preparing them for college readiness. And I bring this up because this is tied into our overall assessment strategy. The ACT in and of itself is a high risk assessment because there is something tied to it. But when we talk about creating opportunities for teachers to reflect on student engagement on the daily, that is what we're trying to do. That is what we are after, to ensure that our students every single day are engaging in that curriculum and in that rigor and in those conversations that will prepare them for our mission, which is college, career, and community readiness.
Ollie, did you have any more comments or questions? All right, thank you. I have not gone yet, so I will wrap it up with just a couple of comments on my own. I really appreciate many of the points that have been raised, particularly about the need to level the playing field, which has been echoed over and over again by members of this board. I completely agree with you. The playing field is not level right now. And part of the reason the playing field is not level right now is because of the ACT. Colleges that are dropping the ACT as a requirement are finding that students have been historically excluded from their institutions are getting in more frequently. I love the fact that colleges are looking at dropping the ACT as a gap closing strategy and as a way of increasing opportunity for all, particularly for students who haven't had opportunities. And companies like Kaplan or Cambridge are deeply invested in maintaining the status quo of the ACT as a gatekeeper, because that's how they make their money. They would not be on this planet without the ACT as a gatekeeper. So I am very much in favor of MMSD finding ways to level the playing field. And I recognize that the ACT is there and some kids have access to preparation that other kids don't. So I would be fine with finding internal strategies to ensure that all kids go into the ACT prepared and all kids have equitable opportunities to prepare for this test. On the other hand, I am really concerned about taking up to $1 million of public funds and pouring it into the testing industry that perpetuates gaps and inequities. I struggle with that, and I'm having a hard time in my mind justifying the use of public funds to support the testing industry that perpetuates gaps. This pretty much builds on what Ali said much better than me, but I have serious concerns for that reason. And I also want to make sure that if we move forward with this, we are very honestly assessing who is using these services. I'm also a little bit nervous that even though we will do outreach to the community, given the rushed timeline, students who are already poised to take advantage of test preparation classes because they know the system and they know what they have to do will be the ones using this service. And it won't actually be closing gaps for students who aren't able to access it. Now, with a longer timeline, that might be different. But given that like right now it's the middle of January and students would be starting this class in early February, that's a pretty heavy lift to really try to target these funds towards students who are not at this point getting the same access to the opportunities we want to see. So again, I'm in favor of leveling the playing field. I'm in favor of MMSD finding a way to do it internally. I'm struggling with MMSD sending money to Kaplan and Cambridge and other test prep companies. So that's where I'm at. If members of the administration respond, I would, just in the interest of time, ask that maybe just one person respond so that we can try to close this out and move on to our next agenda item.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, I'll respond real quickly. Thank you for your comments, and we will take that into consideration. The one thing that I would say is while this first opportunity has a rush timeline, we don't believe all of the opportunities do. And the second thing I would say, it's really on us then as adults to ensure that we're continuing to communicate and get this opportunity to the students that we believe would benefit the most, right? Students find out about these opportunities by us talking to them, by us touching them on the shoulder, by us communicating with them and their families. So I think that that's on us as adults that work in our schools to ensure that this opportunity, as well as whatever future opportunities we are able to provide, that we ensure that it's reaching the students and families that benefit the most.
Sivian, I saw your hand. Did you want to provide a final comment before we close this out?
No, I'm good.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, thank you so much to everybody who was part of this presentation, and we will move on to our final agenda item, and that item is an update on the wellness policy. So just as a review, the wellness policy is a policy that we are required to have. The federal government and the U.S. Department of Agriculture require that we have, all school districts have a wellness policy, and they do specify some of the things that have to be in that wellness policy. And they specify a timeline for revising and revisiting that policy. So given that timeline, we are doing that task right now. We have a committee of people led by Ashley Riley, who is here tonight, that are looking at what needs to be changed in this policy, what's working in this policy. This is an action item, not in the near future, but in June, I think right now we are scheduled to vote on a revised wellness policy. And I'm really grateful that Ashley is here tonight just to update us on the process and get any feedback from the board that might help the committee that's working on this policy as they move forward to bring the best possible revisions to the board in June. So Ashley, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. Should I share my screen or does somebody else want to bring?
Ashley, I can bring it up for you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So as Chris said, my name is Ashley Riley, pronoun she, hers. My position here in Madison is the physical education, health, and wellness coordinator supporting student and staff well-being. And specifically today, you can go to the next slide. I'm thankful to be here to be able to introduce some of the past work and some of the current work around the policy, and to share a timeline for what Chris was talking about, possibly bringing the policy to the board in June. I also want to take the time to thank the board for highlighting the importance of regular wellness updates. So moving forward, monthly updates around kind of wellness and different pieces of the policy. And then also for prioritizing staff well-being with approving the days around mental health and COVID days for staff. So, and also just for staff reaching out, sharing what their needs are, and families as well. So our objectives for today, provide an overview of the past and current work, and then just the timeline for this revision work. As Chris said, the policy is revised well, she may not have mentioned, the timeline is every 3 years. And so the last policy went May of 2018. All right, so also just anchoring in a few things of looking at where wellness aligns with the strategic framework. So first, I would just say the work of the wellness policy is definitely anchored in our core values and how we go about thinking of what wellness is, how to bring equity, health equity into our district and more, and then also a voice of students and staff coming in. Goal number 2, the district in every school is a place where students, staff, families, and staff thrive. That is huge as far as the wellness policy, because it really looks at the environment that students and staff are experiencing in our schools and how that affects academic learning. The next piece would be in the lever number 2, where we will invest in people. And that specific pieces around anti-racist teaching, culturally responsive teaching, and then also looking at hiring and retainment practices for staff, and then also relating to mindfulness and other programs that support that lever. And then lastly, I just calling out the graduate vision that we have for our students as they graduate high school. Wellness is one of the areas that we want students to be able to have reflection and have space to dig into their own mental, physical, and emotional well-being. You can go to the next slide. So our current policy, our vision statement for the wellness policy is all students and staff are and feel safe, healthy, support, engaged, and challenged. We believe that, or the policy states, and we believe that wellness is linked to academic achievement and that students learn better in healthy schools with healthy employees. The policy also calls out that we're seeking to disrupt the health inequities that exist and trying to make sure that we are allocating resources and programming to where is needed most, so that we make sure that all of our students and all of our staff thrive. And just briefly, the wellness policy is anchored in a model that was created by the CDC and the ASCD called the whole school, whole community, whole child model, or what I may refer to today as the WISC model. And that's what you see the image on the screen, basically anchoring in that in order for students and staff to be successful, looking at the whole child, the whole self, and looking at how different systems work together with process, policy, and practice to improve that learning for students. And the key thing here is it also really looking at the integration of systems. So it's not necessarily a separate thing, but looking at how the district works together as, to support these in a collaborative way. And I mentioned earlier that I'm thankful that we'll have a space in, I believe, the instruction work group meetings moving forward to just continue to talk about the wellness policy, but then also like where current practices and things are. So this is a tentative schedule, and I can give updates if this needs to change, but the idea that each month bringing different components of that of the wellness policy to this space, and just kind of hearing from different people across the district, because as you see these topics that are listed here, there's lots of different departments that this work includes. So just kind of briefly, this is just kind of the past history. So before COVID, the last policy was passed in 2018. We created the District Wellness Advisory Council at that time, which is made up of diverse representation of our families, staff, community, and students. Then we also had we have an employee wellness committee that is specifically looking at the well-being of our adults or our staff. And then in the meantime, we already had some systems some partnerships created with Center for Healthy Minds and UW mindfulness program, but kind of anchoring in the work of the mindfulness resources available to staff. Moving forward, then we established site-based wellness liaisons in each of the schools as a person that acts as a liaison between district programming and schools themselves. And then right before COVID, that last point was right before COVID, we launched in February 2020, we did the first take at a MMSD Healthy Schools Progress tool, where it looked at the implementation of the policy in schools and had schools kind of reflect on where they were at, and then also connecting them to resources to support areas that needed strengthening. Next. All right. Oh, sorry. Okay. And then just kind of, so during COVID, I'll just say things shifted. There was a lot of, I guess would say the start to a lot more collaboration across departments around just looking at, you may have remembered the Being Well websites and the big updates, things like that around wellness, looking at cross-departmentally. From 2021, specifically starting back with, if you want to say policy work, myself and the director of food services at the time took this WellSat survey or assessment tool that measures the strength of your wellness policy. We collected that data. And then starting in September, we reconvened the lead planning team. And then October had the first DWAC meeting of this school year. And then in December, and then moving forward with this month, we have a policy subcommittee of different people in the community that are looking at specifically language in the policy, and then coming back to the whole group later this year. You can go to the next. And then moving forward, we will bring the large group DWAC committee back together. And then also a key thing, and maybe this is just something to throw out for just to get some ideas and thoughts, but we did do a community input survey last before winter break, but we definitely need to continue to get more input from students, staff, and families and community around what does this look like, and where do we need to strengthen areas in our district. So we plan to host targeted listening sessions and just specific groups of people to make sure that we have all voices present as far as where we need to go. And then bringing the policy to vote possibly in June is kind of the timeline. And then this is just a brief overview of so far what we've heard. So what is working well? I'm not going to read all of these on here, but just kind of highlighting things that so far, whether it was the community input survey, whether it was the District Wellness Advisory Council coming together and people on that sharing ideas or other, but RJ, LGBTQ plus inclusive work was called out several times, our health services response to COVID, mindfulness programming, and more there. And then just some areas of key consideration moving forward in revising this policy. One big component is one of the sections isn't really elaborated in our current policy. That's called physical environment. And that really digs into which COVID has completely emphasized why this area is so important for our health, but just the physical spaces that we're in, also safety and things like that as well. So adding physical environment to the policy, continuing to look at practices of, foods accessible to students, access to water, and then also just a key piece, possibly adding a component that specifically calls out student voice in the policy, because right now the components have family and community, but not necessarily students call out specifically. All right, yes, and then these are just our commitments moving forward. The group is listening to students and staff and then taking action in response, continuing the cross-departmental collaboration. As shown on the WISC model, it's a lot of different departments. And if we're thinking about collaborating and integrating better, breaking those silos, then the implementation and the results of creating healthier schools will be more successful. And then continuing to really dive into how our programming and supports are inclusive of all people, and continuing to disrupt the systems that are currently unjust or unwell.
Thank you so much, Ashley. This would be an opportunity for board members to ask questions or provide feedback on the process of revising this policy. I also want to add that Ollie and I are both serving on the policy subcommittee for this process. So there is board representation at these meetings. Ollie, go ahead.
Ashley, I want to start by thanking you for all of your work in the different areas in which you emphasize the well-being of our students. I think, there's a constant ongoing conversation about mental health right now. We are seeing more students with anxiety, more students engaging in self-harm, more students engaging in suicidal ideation. And so looking to the graph you just showed us and the areas of strength, I'm wondering how, we're supporting students' mental health. I did see the wellness days on there as something that went well, and we did have universal mental health days for teachers. Dr. Jenkins recently introduced to the board an additional 2 mental health days for staff, but how are we translating that to our young people? And I want to champion that. I think making sure our young people know that we as a district prioritize their mental health and well-being is something that I'm committed to doing a better job of and would like to work with you to do.
Thank you.
Ashley, would you like us to take this one?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. I want to just thank Ashley for taking leadership in this work and allowing us to participate as team members around mental health. Dr. Getchow is on the call, so I will let her answer this question. But I think what we can do tonight is provide just a very succinct summary of some of our mental health supports and can share with the board a more thorough summary at a future meeting if that is helpful. Dr. Getchow, do you mind hopping in?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that, what I really heard in your question and what I really think is a job that we have ahead of us is how do we let our students know that we're paying attention? And there's been a lot of local and statewide surveys and actually national surveys that really highlighted that during the pandemic, students really felt that while they had their concerns, they were concerned about letting school staff or their families know how they were struggling because they were worried about everyone else who was struggling around them. So I really just picked up on your messaging about how do we message to students what's available to them. And I think that last year we did some work with Student Senate, and we're starting to dip back into that. There's some community activities that are working on youth voice that we're really getting connected to, but we really need to circle back to figure out how we're more intentional in connecting with our youth to make sure they're hearing the message that we are paying attention and that where the resources are. We've been more intentional in getting things out in staff bulletins and parent bulletins and family bulletins, but I think that message about getting out to students is a really important one. We have done some work this year with NAMI and some other organizations to work to get into our schools and some pilots, and so we'll continue some of that work. But I want to really bring that back to my team about getting, and also we've been doing some work with like our student services folks to say, you know, I know you did a great job at the beginning of the year, letting everyone know how you access school psychologists, school social workers, et cetera. But we all know that in COVID, we have to repeat things over and over and over in multiple ways. So yeah, I think, so thank you for the question. That's what I really took from it, is how do we connect back with our youth? Because there are a lot of programs available, and we want to just make sure, and a lot of staff available that really are very attentive to students' well-being, but how do we make sure that students are actually feeling that? So thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. And I think we as a board are really committed to promoting that work and making sure our students have access to the supports that we're investing in as a district. So thank you for all the work you're doing. Actually, my second question is around conflict resolution and what we're doing to support students in managing conflict as they experience kind of the additional strain and pressure of the pandemic. And then you did a really beautiful presentation on consent and our human growth and development approaches. And I've gotten to see you do just phenomenal work around that over the years. And so talking about conflict resolution and also sexual violence, as that's come up for our district, and what we're doing to be proactive in terms of giving kids the tools they need to navigate consent at an appropriate age and in appropriate ways. And that's it for my questions.
Thank you for your questions. I will first address that you said the conflict resolution, just fully calling out that conflict resolution may live in a lot of different places, and that's kind of one of the parts of bringing things together and integrating. But what I can speak on is health education, and health education has conflict resolution content in there, usually specifically are connected to the skill of interpersonal communication. So how to resolve conflicts, how to talk with others, how to express feelings, how to verbalize emotions as well. So an example is, and well, I can give more information on health education when that would come up on that month, but we have K-5 curriculum right now that we have available for health education. And in that there is a unit and lessons with conflict resolution. It's not a end all be all, but that's just an example of where that can live. And then I would also, I don't know who for sure is all on the call, but when we look at CEL, it's very closely linked with CEL, a lot of the health education topics as well. So, and then, oh, Leo.
Actually, I don't think I need to elaborate. I think
Okay.
that's helpful. Go ahead, keep going.
And then as far as consent, so with our human growth and development lessons and our health education lessons, so human growth and development lives in health, but oftentimes we just think of human growth and development as like 4th and 5th grade and on up. But in developmentally appropriate ways, conversations around what is consent or boundaries and things like that are found within the health education curriculum. Definitely always wanting to strengthen that and expand upon that, but going up into middle school and high school as well, consent is brought into health. And then I would also add that with the wellness policy, I mentioned that physical environment as a piece that isn't necessarily built out that much. In the current policy, it's stated that we will create safe spaces, but when you look into that WIS component, it talks about safety, and it talks about things like, not just physical safety, but beyond that. So I feel like revising this policy presents opportunities to add specific language around whether consent or just kind of looking at creating safe environments for students, whether it's bullying, things like that. So,
Savian.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to give feedback. I just wanted to highlight what surfaced and came through in the presentation was staff and student voice. I think especially, inspiring our staff and students to be activists and to advocate for themselves and for our system and for our community, as we are in a ecosystem of different systems, and we need change at all levels so people can lead and live more healthy lives. And also just want to make sure that we as a board definitely put the resources behind some of these things that are coming up through our budget process. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Gordon, you go first.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm really proud of all the work that you all accomplished so far. I'm especially ecstatic about, the equity work, restorative justice and ensuring, inclusive work around things that pertains to the LGBTQ plus community. I know that's very important for our students to feel, well-being in our educational spaces. So I greatly appreciate that. And also appreciate that, looking forward that you all want to tackle on a lot of things such as, breaking the stigma around free and reduced lunch and increasing hiring of staff of color. These are really amazing things that, we need to see happen in our district. So again, I appreciate all of you all's work on it. And I just hope that this work is continued to be, worked on for years to come.
Thanks, Gordon. Ashley, were you going to respond or no? Okay. I will echo all the thanks. This was a wonderful presentation, and I really appreciate the opportunity to catch the board up on what's going on with wellness and the wellness policy. I also want to echo Savian's comments about the budget. We're in a really good place right now in that we're working on the wellness policy at a time when we're also thinking about how can we rethink how we do education as a result of COVID. And there are many overlaps there, like more use of the outdoors and outdoor spaces, being mindful of screen time. I think there's lots of serendipitous opportunities at the intersection of trying to think about what lessons we've learned from COVID and the possibility of budget being available through SR3 to address some of those lessons learned through COVID, and the fact that we're revising this policy. So I hope that even though the policy may not come before the board until June, that your team feels empowered to come to us before that if you have ideas for strategic equity investments that could help to promote wellness in our schools and align with where you want to go with the policy. I also just wanted to add that before COVID even, we were hearing from students who were raising concerns about Phy-Ed and maybe health also, and how it was triggering body image issues for them. And we know that those body image issues have been exacerbated during COVID, and I'm hopeful that that can also be addressed through the work of this policy revision. So just wanted to put that out there.
I would just like to add to this as we're closing this out, I guess. Thank you, Chris, for lifting that. And I think it totally aligns with the sentiment of the team. As we started looking at the wellness policy, very quickly we moved from compliance to a living document that reflects our school district as to what is going on. When you lift COVID, right? We had that conversation about so many strategies and so many things that needed to be implemented during these times. And so we were very intentional in really looking at this, not as an opportunity to ensure that we're in compliance with the state, but to make sure that this becomes a living document that guides our steps. And so I am very excited to hear you say that, because it kind of validates that we're in line with your thinking, with the board's thinking as to what we need to do. When I heard consent, we had a robust conversation the other day about that in this document, and so we really want to be intentional. We want this to be lockstep with our school improvement plan, just as that has to be a living document. This has to be a living document, and we have to move beyond this place of just simple compliance. And so I just want to thank the team. I have to say this too. As we started looking at this policy, we noticed that this is perhaps one of the only policies that touch every aspect of our district, every department. When we started working on this, we saw SEL, we saw RJ, we saw nutrition, and it just went on and on and on. And so we're going to keep the board abreast of our steps along the way as we introduce all of the components of the district and all of the departments that's associated with this policy. So thank you for the feedback. We'll definitely take that back with the team as we continue to build this policy, build a policy that we can all be proud of. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Ashley, for taking the lead on this. You've done an outstanding job.
Any other questions or comments regarding the wellness policy? All right, well, thank you, Ashley. We really appreciate your presentation. All right, that brings us to the end of our agenda. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second, Maya Pearson.
Thank you. Gordon, thanks. Gordon, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Maya. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.